Hey everyone, thanks so much for stopping by. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy.
During an expedition into mysterious ancient ruins, Luffy suddenly vanishes, leaving the Straw Hats frantic and desperate to find him. Instead of answers, they're pulled into something far more unsettling: Luffy's own memories. Trapped in the past with no clear way out, the crew is forced to relive moments from Luffy's childhood, moments he never shared and never planned for them to see. As they witness his early life, his bond with Ace, and the pain and loneliness hidden behind his usual grin, the Straw Hats come face to face with the emotional scars that shaped their captain. The journey becomes less about rescue and more about understanding, as each memory challenges how they see Luffy and their role in his life. Blending friendship, hurt, comfort, and deep emotional introspection, this long, heartfelt fic explores brotherhood, trauma, and unconditional loyalty, showing that some memories are buried not because they're forgotten, but because they hurt too much to share. Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me. The author is Daughter of the Sea by Kuchiachi.
Chapter 5. Enter Ace and Sabo, the brothers meet. This certainly explains a lot, Robin said softly as it went dark around them once again. So that's why the hat means so much to Luffy, Chopper said, his eyes bright. He treasures it so that he can give it back to Shanks someday. Frankie and Brook were both crying their eyes out as Usopp stood behind them, hiding his own eyes behind his arm to hold back the tears. A promise between real men. Frankie cried, no matter how much time passes, they're always working to that one goal. Now they understand that you should keep a promise no matter how hard it is to keep. Brook cried out, it's so inspiring, to keep such a promise after all this time. Shanks really is something else, Sanji said, his tone full of respect. I get it now, so after Luffy becomes the king, he wants to fight Shanks and his crew. Something to look forward to, Zoro grinned, resting his hand on his swords. Now this is a battle I can't wait for. Just then, the darkness faded away until they were standing in the middle of what appeared to be the forest they had been in when they first arrived. This isn't getting old, Frankie called, staring around him. It's SUUUUPPPPPER, cool. What happens next? Chopper asked excitedly. I really want to see more. I don't see Luffy anywhere. Take this, shouted out Luffy's voice through some trees. I have a good idea, Nami said, and they poked their heads through the plant life to see Luffy there face to face with a large gorilla that was at least 3 times bigger than him. Luffy had just jumped up, his arm stretching out as he tried to throw a punch. The gorilla dodged it and Luffy fell to the ground, but he wasn't going to give up that easily. He got right back up and tried again, but yet again he was having trouble aiming his punch just right. Well, it seems that the smaller monkeys aren't enough anymore, Robin commented as they watched him jump around and throwing punches. Yeah, but he still sucks at fighting, Frankie said. After the gorilla grabbed hold of Luffy's arm and slammed him into the ground, Luffy bounced up again, tilting the straw hat on his head as he threw his arm back shouting out, "Gum gum," but then his hand got caught in the tree behind him, and like a bungee cord, he was pulled back and swung rather pathetically from the branch. Garp, who had been watching the whole thing, sighed, "Stupid kid." Yeah, I can't argue with that, Sanji nodded as he exhaled the smoke. There's something I need to tell you, Grandpa, Luffy said as his grandpa walked up to him, and moved the hat back so that he could see Luffy's face. Yeah, what is it? He asked. I decided I'm not gonna be some pirate, Luffy told him. Notice how he said, some pirate, Robin smiled. Oh no, Usopp said, suddenly filled with dread, is he really gonna tell his Gramps his dream? Garp's gonna kill him, Chopper shouted fearfully. But at the moment, a big grin appeared on Garp's face as he asked, so you finally came to your senses? Wait for it, Zoro said, and sure enough. Yeah, I'm not gonna become any pirate. Luffy cried out happily. I'm gonna be the king of the pirates. He's dead, Sanji said, shaking his head. Garp looked furious. This is that red hair's influence. He then covered Luffy's face with the hat again before pulling his arm free from the tree. Get out of the way you. He barked at the gorilla, before holding Luffy up. I've gotta knock some sense into this kid's corrupted mind. Rest in peace, Luffy-san, Brook said, now truly afraid of the fuming look on Garp's face. Luffy's face was frozen in fear as he struggled to free himself. I'll never let you become one of their kind, Garp declared and drop-kicked him. Robin blinked in surprise as the others all winced in pain at Garp's beating. Oh, the poor guy, Usopp whispered, hugging his own body close, I hurt just watching. Okay, now I know that Garp's trying to kill him, Sanji said, watching the whole thing with a rather queasy look on his face. Sweat was falling from Zoro's face as Frankie whispered, "But you gotta admit, even as a kid, Luffy could take punishment." But Robin didn't say a word as she examined the nervousness in Garp's eyes, even long after the image faded from them. He certainly knew more than they gave him credit for. She could understand now. The scenery reappeared, and they saw that they were all still in the forest, but now there was Garp who was carrying Luffy Piggy back down a hill. The sun setting in the distance, casting everything in a warm, golden glow as they passed the trees, obviously heading back to the village. "I'm surprised that Luffy's lived past the age of 8 for dealing with a grandpa like that," Nami whispered as they watched Garp slowly approach them. "Yeah, it looks like he'd been in another brutal training session," Sanji added as they moved away so that Garp could pass. They could all see that Luffy had a thick bandage on his forehead and a clogged-up bloody nose as he stared to doze off. His stomach was roaring with hunger as Garp looked at him. Luffy blinked with sleepy eyes as Garp smiled. "Even after tiring yourself out and falling asleep, your stomach is still as active as it always is," he proclaimed. "Yeah, don't we all know it?" Sanji nodded, remembering back to after they got back from Eni's lobby and how Luffy had worked on a technique to eat while asleep. Garp shook his head softly and went on, "You probably hate me for being such a strict granddad." "Strict?" Usopp repeated in a whisper, more like murder attempts. "Enough," Robin said softly, watching the grim expression on Garp's face. "What's wrong, Robin?" Chopper asked as Robin kept looking. She didn't say a word as she followed them, now wishing that she knew what was going on inside Garp's head. Just then, Garp muttered, "But Luffy, the reason I put you through this harsh training, and want you to be a Marine, is because I don't want you to go down the wrong path. That is my wish." That was enough to cause them all to stop and think about what he said, all of them rather taken aback. Garp didn't seem to be the type of person who you could talk to in a serious manner. He was one of those people who didn't know the meaning of the word, tact. But his words seemed to be so sincere. His wish is that Luffy becomes a Marine. Chopper whispered. "Makes sense," Sanji said, his hands in his pockets. After all, what grandfather in his right mind would want their grandson to become a criminal? Even if that's his wish, that's not Luffy's dream, Zoro reminded them. Garp can beat his face into the dirt all he wants to, but that won't change anything. In more ways than one, Robin whispered and they all looked at her as she explained, "No matter how much Garp wants it, the fact is that Luffy is the son of the most wanted criminal in the world. He could never be a Marine even if he wanted to be. So he doesn't want Luffy to become like those other bad pirates." Chopper asked. "I don't think we need to worry," Robin smiled. "Luffy may be a handful, but he'd never become corrupted, at least that's what I believe." "I think we all agree on that," Usopp smiled in agreement. Garp was staring up at the darkening sky before he sighed and hoisted Luffy up a little higher on his back. "Oi, Luffy," he said as he continued down the hill, "I have a treat for you today. The Navy left us plenty of food. You can eat as much as your favorite meat as you want." He then burst out laughing as Luffy's tiny hand gripped his shirt a little tighter. "Isn't that cute?" Robin smiled, watching the two heading back down the hill. "Okay, I get that Garp has good intentions," Nami whispered as she watched the image fade away, "but I don't think he's going about it the right way. I just think that he's not someone who's good with his words, nor do I think he's someone who can express it in a gentle way," Robin whispered as the image reappeared. "He does what he thinks is right, but I have a feeling that he has a much softer side than we give him credit for." "Where are we now anyway?" Usopp asked, looking around at the trees. "This place looks a lot bigger than the forest we were in before." Suddenly, they heard a loud cry of pain coming from the trees behind them. When they turned they could clearly hear Luffy's voice shouting out, "Grandpa, I already told you. I'm gonna be king of the pirates." "I guess that Luffy's still brave enough to say that to his gramps," Sanji muttered with a shake of the head. "Does he want to get killed here?" Just then Garp appeared through the trees, an irritable look on his face as he dragged Luffy along with him by pinching his cheek while Luffy tried desperately to break his grandfather's grip. His rubber body was bouncing along as he slapped at his grandpa's leg to get away. "What do you mean, Pirate King?" Garp bellowed, holding Luffy up a little bit higher. "I think he means the king of all pirates," Frankie explained happily. "I guess that his gentle side has long since faded," Nami asked with a little sweat drop. "I guess it was a while since that last memory." "Let me go," Luffy yelled, continuing to fight. Garp ignored him as he went on, "Not only do you eat a devil fruit, but now you're spouting nonsense as well. Luffy, both you and Ace are destined to become great Marines." "Not in a million years," Usopp laughed at the thought. "If he did join, I think that they would be more afraid of him than any pirate." "Yeah, I still don't know what Garp was thinking," Nami agreed with a big smile as they all trooped behind them. "Luffy, a Marine, I can't picture seeing him in one of those tacky uniforms, can any of you?" "Nope," they all said at the same time before laughing with her. "Damn it," Luffy whined as he continued to struggle, "I'm made of rubber, why does it hurt?" "Let me go, Gramps." "Now that's a little harsh," Brooke said, "using hockey like that."
Yo, quick pause, smash that like button, hit subscribe if you're new here, share this video, and tell me in the comments which part you're loving the most.
Well, there's not much that can get Luffy to behave, Nami sighed. Leaving you in that peaceful village was a mistake, Garp said as they walked along a fallen tree that was acting as a bridge over a small river. Of all things, the Pirate King. Yes, Luffy cried out without any hesitation in his tone. Doesn't he know when to keep his mouth shut? Zoro asked tiredly. You imbecile, Garp exclaimed, pinching his face harder just as Luffy reached out and grabbed one of the passing trees and wrapped his rubber arms all the way around the trunk as Garp walked on without any idea to what was happening. Becoming friends with that damn red hair Shanks is completely unacceptable. Garp's going to regret that if he doesn't let go, Zoro said, seeing Luffy's body stretching out, as Garp kept walking along. I'm gonna become, Luffy started, refusing to let go of the tree and ended up uprooting it and slamming it the back of Garp's head, finally causing him to let go, as strong as Shanks. Luffy finished stubbornly, still hanging onto the tree like a monkey even after it had been snapped in two after hitting his grandfather. Hey, Garp yelled at him furiously. Well, it's his own fault, Usopp laughed as they watched him drag Luffy with him again, arguing all the way. You'll be living here with Dayton and the boys until you and Ace become strong Marines, Garp went on with Luffy walking beside him. Dayton, Luffy repeated grumpily. That's right, Garp answered, and they could all tell from his tone that this was decided and no amount of whining or complaining was going to change it. From now on, this is where you'll be living. Huh? Luffy asked predictably, moving around to stand in front of him. He looked ready to complain, but Garp never gave him a chance. You're going to be living with these guys, he decided again. Try to get along with them. And like that, he punched him hard on the head. Yo ho ho, Brook laughed merrily. I think I now see a resemblance between them. Yeah, Nami answered him with a sigh, rubbing her hand through her bangs. I guess that this is a family trait. Apparently it's normal for them to want something and to just go for it, and that's the end of it. As most of them watched the two argue, Zoro saw a flash of something moving in the trees. When he looked up however, there wasn't anything there, but at the same time, he noticed how the branches were swaying softly as if they had been touched by something just a second ago. Saw that too? Sanji asked him quietly, able to speak with him without anyone noticing as Luffy kept yelling in a loud voice. Zoro nodded, his eye never leaving the tree until the branches became still once again. Someone was there. Didn't get to see who it was though, Sanji went on as they quickly caught up with the rest of the group. Just then they heard Luffy ask, Granddad, who's Ace? They all froze at those words, the atmosphere suddenly becoming so much tenser. He doesn't know Ace yet. Chopper asked quietly. This must be where they first met, Nami whispered, now wishing more than ever that they were out of this place. It was hard enough to hear about Ace's death in the newspaper, but to actually see how they first met. She didn't want to see it. Starting today, he's going to be your big brother, Garp answered, but his tone had become a little more gentle if only for a moment before they set off again. A few minutes later, they reached a small house in the middle of a large clearing. A decent-sized place with a watchtower in the back with a line of clothing hung to the nearest tree, it looked like a handful of people lived there. What a dump, Sanji stated, looking around. I don't know, he's really going to be living in a place like this. It looks more like somewhere where a gang of bandits live. You got that right, Frankie admitted, moving his sunglasses up again so that he could get a better look at it himself. Luffy stared up at it in bright curiosity before he went running around to get a better look at it. As he started to explore, Garp walked on ahead and banged on the door. The front door opened and they were all taken aback when it was a woman who answered it. But not just any woman, a rather tall and overweight woman with long, orange, curly hair and a big, masculine face. There was cigarette held between her lips as she had thrown open the door, yelling out, so annoying. Who's the reckless daredevil? It's me, Garp answered darkly. At his voice, the woman's eyes snapped open and she backed away in fear, stammering, Gee Garp-san. Now that would be an unpleasant surprise, Nami whispered, imagining opening the door to see that standing there. At his name, two men appeared right behind her. The shorter of them was hardly taller than Luffy and was wearing polka-dotted dungarees and a tight turban on his head while carrying a dictionary in his hand. The taller man there was no other way to say it, but his overall appearance looked like a chicken. He had what appeared to be a wattle on his chin, and a comb on his bald head. All of them were looking terrified at the sight of Garp, and were now actually retreating a little. Is this a circus or something? Frankie asked, who are these freaks? I can't say for sure, Robin stated. But it's most likely that these are Dayton and her boys that Garp mentioned. What? He's leaving Luffy with these guys? Zoro asked, raising an eyebrow. Yo ho ho, so these are the ones who raised Luffy-san. Brook exclaimed cheerfully. If that's true, then it would explain a lot, Sanji said with a laugh. Apparently, Nami said slowly, eyeing the woman, who she assumed to be Dayton, with suspicion. But why here? I wish that it was Makino, Chopper sighed sadly, sitting down as he watched. She's really nice. I liked her. I think that's what the problem was for Garp, Zoro said, jerking his thumb to Garp. Just then, Garp said conversationally, you seem to be doing well. You gotta be kidding me. Dayton called out just as Luffy began running around them, looking at everything with bright eyes. I wish you'd just leave me alone for a change. That Ace is already 10 years old, you know. That got their attention. Oh, Chopper called out excitedly, so this is where Ace lives. Yow, Frankie called, striking his pose joyfully. We get to meet Luffy's older brother. Yeah, Usopp cried happily, tears appearing in his eyes again. So we get to see how such devoted brothers met. It would be nice to see him again, even as a kid. Nami laughed, smiling brightly. You met Luffy-san's brother before? Brook asked them in surprise. Yeah, Sanji said, removing his cigarette for a second. Back in Alabasta, but that was a long time ago. Yeah, it was just before you joined up with us, Robin. Chopper added and Robin smiled. Garp chuckled at that and asked, is he? Has it really been that long already? How's he doing? It's nothing to laugh at, the short man called out as Garp began to laugh. If he gets any wilder, we won't be able to control him at all. Just take him with you. Ace. Wild? Nami asked in surprise. But he was so nice when we met him. Anyway, Garp began but the little guy interrupted annoyed. Don't change the subject like that. I agree, Sanji sighed. Apparently that's another bad habit that Luffy inherited from his grandpa. Dayton, who had been watching Luffy run around the whole time, finally lost patience and cried out, sheesh. That kid's so annoying. You get used to it, Zoro commented and watched as Garp reached out and grabbed Luffy when he ran by and held him up so that they could see him. Take care of him too, he said bluntly. Nice way to break it to them, Nami muttered, smacking her forehead, as the other three stared at Garp with speechless expressions, as if they thought he had to be kidding around. What an idiot. The three of them stared at him before Garp scolded Luffy, now come on, Luffy, say hello. Yo, Luffy said at once, holding up a hand to greet them. The man who looked like a chicken looked from around Dayton and asked, who's that kid? He's my grandson, Garp stated simply. They stood there with their jaws falling open in horror. For a moment they seemed too stunned to speak before they cried out, what? Well, you can tell from their expressions that they're taking the news well, Robin chuckled. The little man screamed out, we gotta take care of another one. Garp-san's grandson. Dayton repeated. They all got on their knees and screamed boldly, not happening. You can't help but feel bad for them, Sanji said sympathetically. I mean, we all have problems keeping Luffy out of trouble now, but imagine how he must have been as a kid. Garp crossed his arms as Luffy went running around exploring again. Well, Garp said as he let Luffy back down and he ran around wildly, you have to make your decision. Do you want to spend the rest of your lives behind bars, or will you raise him? Wait, you're saying that they're criminals? Nami, Usopp, and Chopper all cried out at the same time, their jaws falling open in surprise. I get it, Sanji stated, thinking it over. They really are bandits and Garp's blackmailing them. So, in other words, they have a choice to either take care of Luffy and Ace, or jail, Robin summed up for them all. Nami fell to the ground, her expression stony as she whispered, let me get this straight, Garp wants him and Ace to be Marines, but he's leaving the two of them with a bunch of bandits. It would appear so, Robin said, a twinkle of amusement in her eyes. What kind of logic is that? She demanded loudly. It makes no sense. No sense at all. This really does explain a lot, Frankie burst out laughing. But I think Garp decided for them what they're gonna do, they don't have much of a choice here today. Garp was speaking again, I've turned a blind eye so far. But you've committed as many crimes as here are stars in the sky. No way. The three of them shouted out as Garp laughed. The chicken man scratched his head and began, well, true, I don't wanna go to prison. The short man then finished voicing his opinion, but sometimes prison actually seems tempting. Our hands are full with just Ace. Jail or raise Luffy and Ace. Usopp said slowly, holding his hands up as if he was a scale as if to decide which he would rather do. Yeah, I think I can understand. Well, maybe not Ace, Chopper said, thinking back to that loving, kind older brother. He was so nice. I wouldn't bet on that, Frankie disagreed at once, frowning a little at the looks on the bandits' faces. I never met him like some of you, but even I know that just because you're one way as an adult, doesn't mean that you were the same way as a kid. Well, how different could he be? Nami asked. Dayton suddenly cried out, and now you want us to take your grandson too? I'm sure that kid's just as much of a monster, isn't he? That's about it, Usopp and Nami both said at the same time. But Chopper tilted his head in confusion. Monster. What did they mean? Ace was a monster. What a crappy-looking mountain hut, Luffy said bluntly, and Usopp laughed. As blunt as ever I see, Nami sighed fondly. I see that hasn't changed since he was a kid. Dayton had heard him and yelled out, you want to die, you brat. Too bad for her, a couple dragonflies buzzed past and Luffy was completely distracted as he went running after them. He's not listening, Dayton cried out, falling forward. Boss, are you alright? The little man asked. Geez, this is a rough place, Sanji said, running a hand through his hair. And Luffy grew up here. As they talked, they heard Luffy's voice suddenly yelling out, sounding angry, hey. You. Apologize. That's gross. Garp turned at Luffy's yell. Oh, Ace. he said with a grin as he began to walk over to them. "Oh, you're back, Ace," the chicken man called out. The Straw Hats all looked at once, eager to see Ace again, but they stared at what they saw. A young boy, looking no older than 10 or 11 years old, was sitting on the dead body of Animal. Familiar black hair and stretch of freckles were splashed across his cheeks and nose. His body was rigid as he looked down at Luffy with his arms folded and holding a long metal pole. But it was his eyes that sent chills up their spines. His eyes were dark and cold and filled with an anger that seemed so deep that it was beyond rage, hatred. The Straw Hats stared. Nami walked forward and croaked out, That's Ace. He looks really scary," Chopper said, ducking behind Zoro. "That's Luffy-san's older brother." Brook asked in surprise. "Not what I was expecting." "No way," Usopp said at once, pointing wildly at him. "That can't be, he's nothing like the guy we met. The Ace that had met back in Alabasta was cheerful and he and his brother were the best of friends. This boy, though," anger seemed to radiate off of him. "It has to be someone else." "Really?" Chopper called out in relief. "Of course it's him, you idiot," Sanji snapped at him, slapping him. "Who else would it be?" "Hey," Luffy called up again, "apologize." Ace just glared down at him coldly as if daring him to take another step forward. Garp's heavy footsteps were sounded and they turned to see him standing next to Luffy and saying, "Luffy, that's Ace." He smiled up at Ace and finished, "He's 3 years older than you. Starting today, you're going to be living with these people, so you better get along, got it?" Called a loud voice from behind them and they saw Dayton get back up to her feet. Seeing this cold Ace made them all forget about her. "You just decided by yourself?" she demanded. "I don't think that you have much say in the matter," Nami said knowingly. Luffy and Ace continued to glare silently at each other, looking as if they were about to attack until Garp pounded Luffy on the head and said harshly, "Try to get along." But the other three didn't seem to be willing to give up without a fight, for Dayton yelled out, "You think it's settled?" He turned and gave them the evil eye. "You have a problem?" he asked menacingly. A look of pure terror came across their faces and then they stood up straight and all recited, "We'll take care of him." Like he would have taken no for an answer, Frankie said. "My business here is done then," Garp said as they looked back to Ace's cold features. "I'll come to visit when I have the time." What about child support?" the chicken man called after him. "Put it on my tab," Garp called. "This isn't a bar, you know." Dayton screamed at him. Welcome anytime," she yelled out, sweat pouring down her face. "He sure seems to have them well trained," Zoro answered, watching Garp's retreating back. "I don't get it," Nami said with a frown and folded her arms. Just what was he thinking? Leaving his grandchildren here of all places. And with a family of mountain bandits to boot. Just what was he thinking? But Robin was thinking it all over. To her, it actually made sense to leave them here. But before she could voice her own opinion, the other two bandits were asking Dayton, "Hey, boss, what are we going to with another one to take care of?" "Well, first let's go have something to eat," she said sourly. "Go cook something up. Looks like we just learned where Luffy got his idea that eating a meal solves everything," Sanji said as he watched with the others as Ace jumped down from his kill and slowly walked towards Luffy. "Apologize," Luffy yelled at Ace one more time, but predictably, Ace just walked right past him without saying a word. It was clear on his face that he felt it wasn't worth the trouble. "Does anyone else here feel the temperature drop?" Usopp gulped, as he looked at Ace's cold eyes. "You aren't the only one who feels that," Frankie said shivering. Luffy fumed and pulled his straw hat down over his head. Then he paused as if thinking something over. But for the rest of them, they couldn't understand just what happened here. Could this really be the same person they met before in Alabasta? The same person who asked that they take care of his little brother. The same person that Luffy had stormed Impel Down in Marine headquarters to rescue. How could it have gone from this to that? Here, it looked as if they couldn't stand each other. "Ace-san does not look very friendly," Brook said worriedly, "he seems so angry." "Are you guys sure it's the same Ace?" Usopp asked, still not convinced. "How can it be anyone else?" Sanji asked him irritably. "You think that there are two Aces or something?" "Let's just see what happens," Zoro said, suddenly realizing what the thing watching from the trees had been. As he watched Luffy wipe off the spit on his face and followed Ace into the house. They followed Luffy into the house. It appeared to have been deserted as Luffy looked around, most likely looking for Ace. As he wandered around, a knife came out of nowhere and was pointed at Luffy's neck. Usopp called in panic, "They're gonna kill him." Nami punched him in the head shouting, "Would you shut up?" "Who the hell are you?" the bandit asked, and they all appeared out of the darkness. A decent amount of them were gathered around them, like guards, prepared to grab him if he escaped. "Let go of me," Luffy yelled, staring down at the weapon that seemed to glint a little in the low light. "If you don't want to die," the bandit holding the knife at his throat, "then fork over all your cash." Did they really think that a 7-year-old has cash? Sanji asked impatiently. "Luffy-san doesn't have much luck with bandits, does he?" Brook asked, thinking about that last one. "Nope," they all agreed. "I don't have any money," Luffy told them honestly. "Then call your parents and make them bring some," another bandit demanded at once. "Kidnapping now?" Nami asked. You really didn't expect Luffy to be kidnapped, more to be like the kidnapper. I've only got Granddad, Luffy said. Then call your Gramps here. A third bandit told him. What's his name? They're in for a nasty surprise, Brook said, thinking of Garp. Garp-san, said a familiar voice. The lights suddenly brightened as the door opened and the little man from before was there. The other bandits' eyes opened wide in horror as sweat poured down their faces. This kid is. The bandit holding Luffy croaked out. He's gonna live with us from now on, he finished as if speaking a death sentence. That was when every single bandit seemed to come out of the woodworks and cried out in panic. Why'd you take him? This isn't a nursery school, you know. Boss, you're totally gutless. Dayton then came back in with a giant plate of meat and yelled out, shut it, you scumbags. Well, she knows how to control them, I'll give her that, Zoro said as they all fell silent at that. It's time for dinner, she added, pointing to all the food. At that, drool came down from the other bandits' faces as they launched themselves at the meat. As they watched them devour the meat like a pack of animals, Luffy raced over too, only to get stepped on. What a wild place, Frankie said, almost reminds me of my boys back home at Water 7. As he said that, he couldn't help but wonder just how they were doing these days. You know, now I think I understand why Luffy eats like there's no tomorrow, Nami said as they all sweat dropped, watching them all eat and fight with each other. Yeah, Usopp agreed, exasperated. In this house you have to fight just to get fed. And if you don't, you go hungry, Zoro finished. Yo ho ho, Brook said. How harsh. In the end, it was Luffy, Ace and Dayton who were sitting around a fire in the center of the room. Ace was devouring some of the meat he stole earlier, while Dayton sipped some sake. Luffy frowned at the small bowl of rice in his hand. Was that all he could get? Usopp asked with wide eyes. That's not even a mouthful for a normal person. They watched as Luffy tilted the small bowl and swallowed its contents in one go before he yelled out, I want another bowl. But when no one else noticed him he said, Pops, I want another bowl. I'm a woman. Dayton yelled at him. Chopper looked confused. She is. Yeah, I can see where someone might make the mistake, Frankie agreed, looking at her up and down. And don't you realize where you've been left? She barked at Luffy. No, was his blunt answer. Then I'll tell you, Dayton said as a rather horrid grin appeared on her face. She's scaring me, Chopper whispered. I think that's the idea, Robin said. She's trying to scare him. This is the hideout of the mountain bandits who rule MT. Corvo, the Dayton family. She said in a dark voice. Mount Corvo, Robin said in surprise. You've heard of it? Nami asked her and they all turned to look. Only by name, Robin said, frowning a little. If what I'm thinking of is right, then this is Goa Kingdom on Dawn Island. Dawn Island, Chopper repeated, so this is where Luffy was born. Like I said, I only know the rumors, Robin said, her hand up and under her chin, meaning that she was deep in thought. But if I'm right, they say that Goa Kingdom is supposed to be the most beautiful and cleanest kingdom in the entire East Blue. What? Sanji asked startled. You mean Luffy came from a place like that? You sure don't expect to hear that, Usopp said, his face shown nothing but disbelief as he looked back to the bandits who were still gnawing on the bones of their meals like dogs. So far, I don't see anything like that though. That's what I know, Robin said, still frowning. Mount Corvo is supposed to be part of it. Outside Goa is a forest that is filled with animals of incredible size and ferocity. Incredible size and ferocity, Zoro repeated, just what do you mean by that? Mountain bandits. I hate mountain bandits, Luffy said, a dull look passing over his face. Can't blame him for that, Usopp said nodding. I mean, he was almost eaten because of the last one he met. Dayton responded by sticking a knife into the floor in front of him. Shut it, you damn brat. She yelled at him. It's already a pain in the ass raising you. If you don't want to be here, that's fine by us. Just go somewhere and die like an animal. She can't be serious about that, can she? Chopper asked them, gulping painfully at the thought. Zoro narrowed his eyes. Doesn't sound like it to me. Geez, what was Garp thinking in leaving his grandsons here? Nami demanded for what felt like the millionth time. Now, boss, the chicken man, who they found out was named Magra, spoke up attempting to calm Dayton down. I'm still hungry, Luffy whined, before glancing up at all the meat that Ace was scarfing down and drool was forming on his mouth. I want some of that meat. Dayton then held out a piece of it and Luffy tried to take a bite out of it, only for her to pull it away so that he chomped down on air. Nami frowned a little, but she couldn't stop thinking how cute Luffy was when he was a little kid. I'll have you know that this meat is the meat Ace hunted and brought back. Dayton told Luffy as she began chowing down on it herself. He shares it with us and that's why he gets a place at our table. The life of a mountain bandit is harsh. Starting tomorrow, we're going to work you half to death. Cleaning, laundry, shoe and weapon polishing, theft, looting, swindling, and killing. And listen, you're not gonna say a single word to Garp about the stuff we make you do. Why do I get the feeling that's not what happened? Frankie asked while Robin giggled and Brook laughed. 1 bowl of rice and 1 glass of water a day. Dayton continued, that's all I'm giving you. Anything else you'll have to get for yourself. You'll have to raise yourself to be strong, she said with a smug smile, and pausing to see if he would start crying or complaining. But that's not really fair, is it? Usopp asked in concern. I mean, even if it's Luffy, he's still only 7, right? Something tells me we don't need to worry, Robin said with a smile. Alright, Luffy said, causing Dayton to fall face first onto the floor. Of course he agrees, Nami said dryly. You're fine with it? Dayton cried startled. You should be crying by now. Luffy didn't look the least bit surprised by anything she said. Granddad threw me into the jungle once. Earthworms, snakes, frogs, mushrooms, if this is a jungle then I'll be just fine. Usopp started turning green at the thought. Oh, man, he said looking sick as he held onto his stomach. How can anyone live on that stuff? Wow, so even back then he had a stomach made of scrap iron, Sanji said impressed. No, that's me bro. Frankie said, knocking on his own stomach to hear the pang of metal. But mushrooms? Usopp repeated shaking his head. He had always hated mushrooms, after having eaten a poisonous once when he was younger. Robin giggled again as she commented, looks like Luffy is already used to taking care of himself. If I had a grandfather like Garp, then I guess, Zoro stated dryly. Besides, Luffy carried on, I'm gonna be a pirate someday. So I've gotta deal with at least this much. But pirates don't eat half the things you do, Nami called out. But at his words, Ace looked over at Luffy for the briefest moment before he stood up and headed to the door. As the other bandits tried to pull Dayton's head out of the floor, Luffy looked up to see Ace just as he walked out. Where's he going? Luffy asked himself before he jumped up and went after him just as Dayton yelled after him, which of course he ignored. Hey, Luffy called just as Ace shut the door behind him, leaving everything in darkness. Why do I think this isn't a good idea? Nami asked, still disturbed by Ace's attitude. Luffy stopped for a moment, staring blankly at the door in front of him, as if wondering what he should do. Then he shook his head before nodding determinedly and pushing the door open. Hey, Luffy called again, running outside and chasing after Ace, wait up. Hey, Ace finally turned around and glared down at Luffy with those angry-looking eyes. He's creeping me out now, Usopp whispered quietly. It feel like he's going to attack him if he gets too close. But Luffy didn't seem to notice as he waved and called up happily, I'm Luffy. I'm not angry that you spat at me anymore. It's nothing to get worked up about. Let's be friends. Why does that sound familiar? Brook asked, tilting his head as he thought it over. He's thinking of Shanks, Robin smiled. Well, I guess he could have had worse role models, Sanji admitted with a small smile himself. Ace just stared at Luffy, a blank mask on his face. Are you going somewhere? Luffy called, but instead of answering, he did something that made them all gasp. Ace turned and kicked the tree he was closest to. The first kick broke it as it slowly fell and landed with a crash, the second kick he aimed it towards Luffy so that it went rolling towards him. Did he just knock that tree down? Nami yelled in disbelief. Yes, Usopp cried, grabbing his hair in panic, and now he's rolling it towards us. Luffy screamed in panic before he turned and ran as fast as he could down the hill as the tree came barreling towards him. Luffy ran until he came to a giant rock and he screamed out, a dead end. And with a crash, the tree hit him and he was flattened against tree and stone. They all stood there and watched, trying to wrap their heads around what Ace had just done. If it wasn't for his rubber body, Luffy probably would have been killed, Robin observed calmly as she watched Luffy try to pull himself out from under the tree. Now is not the point. Usopp screeched, pointing in the direction that Ace was heading in. He just tried to kill him without a second thought. There's no way that could be the same Ace we met before. Man, if Luffy had to live with this, no wonder he got strong, Frankie said, folding his massive arms. Just talking to his brother could have gotten him killed. He's scaring me, Chopper whispered, looking at Ace's retreating back. I wonder what happened to get them to become brothers, Robin asked curiously. Well, I'm sure we'll find out if we keep watching, Sanji said, as Luffy pulled himself out and was now gasping for air. Luffy was as stubborn as when he was a child as he was as their captain. Covered in bruises, he went chasing after Ace and onto a rickety old bridge that stretched over a large gorge. Ace was already halfway across by the time that Luffy stepped on. Realizing that someone else was there, he turned and looked taken aback to see Luffy there. It quickly vanished though, replaced with an annoyed frown as he turned and began to walk toward Luffy who was gasping for breath. Luffy, Usopp called, I know you can't hear us. But you really should move back. He doesn't look like he wants to be your friend. Of course, it made no difference. Luffy straightened up and smiled, obviously thinking that Ace was finally going to talk to him. But the Straw Hats noticed the hand that held the metal pole tightening and he charged forward, striking Luffy hard enough to knock him off the bridge. Everyone but Zoro cried out in surprise as Luffy flew up into the air and over the bridge. Instead, Zoro was staring at the wild look in Ace's eyes. A 10-year-old boy looked as if he were a completely feral animal. Even as he watched Luffy fall, there was nothing but anger in those cold, pitiless eyes. What he saw disturbed him. Luffy was falling, screaming the whole way as Ace just stared coldly after him before carrying on his way. What the hell was that for? Sanji yelled out. What is his problem? He was just a kid. He wasn't doing anything. The rest of the crew had to agree. They couldn't believe that this was Ace, Luffy's kind and polite older brother who had asked them to look after Luffy for him. Chopper, Nami and Usopp seemed to be in some kind of shock. Just what is going on here? Nami cried, gripping her hair in confusion. A normal person could have died from that. Didn't he know that? Usopp looked over the edge of the gorge and cried out, "Eh. There's water down there." Robin merely sighed softly as they looked to her and the memory faded around them so that they were in the darkness again. I don't think he was going to go as far as to try and kill him. Could have fooled me, Zoro said, shocked by what he had seen. I've seen less obvious murder attempts. He really is a monster, Chopper whispered in a scared tone, and shaking at the thought of those cold eyes. Their vision returned in no time at all, but it was still dark. It wasn't until the moon came out from behind the clouds did they realize that it was nighttime. With the light of a moon overhead, they looked around to see that they were back in front of the bandits' hideout was. Through the shadows of the trees they saw a small figure stumbling through. When he came close enough, they saw it was Luffy, and he looked like he had just gone through hell. Every inch of his body was scratched and bruised, he was also covered in dirt and blood. His clothes were torn, he had several nasty gashes on his chest and shoulders, one of his eyes was bloody and swollen and there was a cut on his forehead that was still bleeding. "Eh. Chopper yelled, running forward to treat the injuries, only to end up passing through him. As Luffy got closer to the hut, the white dog that was sleeping outside woke up with a start, and began barking. A few minutes later, the little man called Dogra looked out sleepily to tell the mutt to be quiet. When he saw who it was he yelled out, "Boss! Boss Dayton!" "Who is?" Mogra asked before he stopped dead as he stared at Luffy like he was a ghost. "Who's here?" Dayton called, also coming to the door before she yelled in shock. It's you. Hey, that Luffy came back alive." Another bandit called out as Luffy stumbled over to them. "This kid," Dayton yelled coming over and pulling at Luffy's face. "You're still alive. He's hurt." Chopper yelled at her angrily. "Are you even gonna look him over before you ask him questions?" "Looks like they could care less," Frankie said, shaking his heat as Mogra tried to calm Dayton down. "Where the hell did you go?" she demanded. Now, Mogra said in a more gentle voice as he turned to Luffy. "Where were you? Where did you go?" "It's already been a week," Dogra added. "A whole week?" Brook yelled out in surprise. "I guess he just got lost trying to find his way back up the cliff," Zoro said lightly. "That's rich coming from you," Sanji said in disgust. "Did you say something, you crappy cook?" Zoro growled at him. "I was chased around by wolves at the bottom of the valley," said Luffy tiredly, his face stretched out. "Chased by wolves for a whole week," squeaked Usopp, his jaw falling open. "I think he left out some major details," muttered Sanji, looking around for Ace. "Why doesn't he tell them that Ace knocked him down there?" Chopper asked them. "Knowing Luffy, he'll have his reasons," Nami asked, her hands on her hips. "But seriously, that Ace really is out of control. The bottom of the valley." Dogra repeated in shock, "Why'd you go there?" "Well, it's not as if he went down there on purpose," Usopp stated in annoyance. Luffy didn't seem to be able to answer, or rather, he didn't seem to want to answer to that. "Well, in any case, it's a good thing he's safe," Dogra said to Dayton. "The hell it is. This just means that the troublemaker had returned." Dayton shouted annoyed, picking up Luffy by what was left of his shirt as she dragged him off to a small room inside the house. As they looked in, the first thing they saw was Ace sleeping there before she dropped Luffy on the floor next to him. "I see that he doesn't seem to be having trouble sleeping," Sanji muttered darkly, looking at him. "Makes me wonder if he has a conscience. Go to sleep for now. We're putting you to work tomorrow," said Dayton before closing the door with a snap. Luffy was so tired that he shut his eyes and was out at once, and that was the end of the memory as the darkness returned. They didn't treat his wounds. Chopper roared out, taking his heavy point form in anger. "How could they do that? Those cuts look really bad. And attacked by wolves. Don't they know just how sick he could have gotten? WHO knows what happened to him down in that valley." "Oi Chopper. This all happened years ago," Zoro called out loudly. "There's no point in getting upset about it now." "But they didn't even care that he was okay," said Chopper, his eyes glazed with angry tears. Zoro didn't say anything, but put his hand on Chopper's shoulder in a comforting gesture as he returned to his usual form. "Seriously, what was Garp thinking?" Usopp said, smacking his forehead. "What's the point of leaving them in the middle of nowhere with bandits like this?" "Actually," Robin said slowly, "I can understand why he did it." "What?" They yelled at her incredulously. "You mean you agree with this?" Usopp said to her in horror. "I'm just saying that it makes sense to hide them here," she answered before they all blinked at her in confusion. "Hide?" Brook asked. You could practically see the question marks above his head. "What do you mean by hide, Robin-san?" Robin sighed as she explained, "Garp may have a funny way of showing it, but I can tell that he truly cares about Ace and Luffy. That's why he hid them here." "Did you forget who their fathers are?" "You mean Roger and Dragon?" Usopp asked before his eyes widened in realization. "Exactly," she said as she folded her arms. The son of the Pirate King and the son of the infamous revolutionary leader, believe me when I say that the world government would never have let them live if they knew about their lineage. And they're only kids here, that's why Garp kept this secret. If anyone ever found out about their fathers, then they would be put into a lot of danger. Hiding them out in the middle of nowhere was probably the best thing he could have done. They let that all sink in and Nami whispered, I guess I can understand, but Garp may go about it differently, Robin said. But I agree that keeping the boys as far away from as many people as possible was the best thing to do, especially since they were only children. Just then, it was bright and sunny out when the memory returned. Luffy came charging out the door with a new shirt and a few bandages on his face as he went chasing after Ace like he did before, calling out to him to wait up and to be friends. Ace stared back at him before he broke into a run and Luffy went after him, around rocks, under branches, once even underneath a large hole in a tree trunk until they reached a pond that was filled with logs. Ace jumped across the water with the help of some vines that were hanging over it and up some rocks before he finally stopped to watch Luffy catch up. Ace, Luffy called stubbornly from the other side of the water. Let's be friends. He then went to jump onto the logs that were floating in the water, only to find out that they weren't logs at all. Usopp, Nami, Brook, and Chopper yelled as crocodile jaws opened wide and went after him. Yo, Ace. Usopp yelled up to him. Go and get him, he'll be eaten. But Ace didn't do anything as he watched and jumped away. Why am I not surprised? Nami sighed exasperatedly. Really, what was she expecting? After seeing how cold-hearted Ace was so far, what made her think that he would suddenly help? Just what the hell is going on here? All the memories they saw after that were all the same. Luffy would chase after Ace when he left the house with Dayton shouting after him to get back and do chores. Every day he would get farther and farther, but always ended up in dangerous situations when Ace was able to ditch him. They saw him almost getting eaten by a giant snake, getting knocked off a cliff into a bird's nest and then attacked by birds, falling into a raging river filled with fish with sharp teeth before he was rescued by the bandits, and so many other horrible things. Luffy kept chasing after Ace, but could never catch up. Even so, day after day, rain or shine, he kept desperately chasing after him. Doesn't he know when to give up? Usopp yelled out after seeing Ace throw a beehive at him and Luffy being attacked by the bees. You think he would have had enough by now? Of course not, Frankie said shaking his head. But why is he doing it? Nami demanded. What's the point if he's going to keep getting hurt? I think it's quite clear by now that Ace doesn't want anything to do with Luffy. I think I know the reason, Robin said softly. What? She asked in surprise as Robin watched the familiar sadness in Luffy's eyes each time he was forced to return to the bandits alone. If I'm right, then we'll sure to find out soon, she answered. Before they could ask her what she meant, the memory came back and it was raining. Luffy was still running after Ace but quickly lost him again. They were in a much thicker part of the forest, now looking more like a jungle than a forest. Damn, Luffy said, finally stopping and staring around him for a clue as to where Ace went. I lost him again. Ace sure is good. He's persistent, I'll give him that, Frankie said, folding his arms, and sitting back down. Even back then, why is he praising Ace after all that? Nami asked. Quiet, Zoro said, not moving a muscle, but becoming tense. Something's there. Something big, Sanji agreed, looking over his shoulder. Usopp called, reaching for his slingshot, only to remember, oh, wait, this is a memory, we can't get hurt here. What is it? Frankie asked at once, still uneasy. Instead of answering, they looked to the shadows of the trees as soon as they heard a noise. Luffy heard it too, thinking it was Ace. He turned and yelled, Ace, is that you? Lightning flashed and what they saw made Brook and the weakling trio scream out in terror. It was a tiger, but not just any tiger, the biggest tiger any of them had ever seen. Luffy was hardly bigger than one of its claws as the enormous beast lumbered forward. The boy screamed and fell back, too scared to move as it came closer. What's up with this forest? Usopp yelled out as Chopper screamed in terror, it's not normal. I told you, Robin said, watching as calmly as always. This place is filled with beasts of unnatural size. Zoro and Sanji saw something move above them and looked up to see Ace crouching by a bush as he watched. This time it was different though, a look of alarm was on his face as he bit down on his thumb, as if wondering what he should do. Zoro raised his eyebrows, did he actually look concerned this time? Okay, Usopp yelled, never looking away from the tiger. I get the fact that Ace doesn't want anything to do with Luffy. But this is cruel. My legs won't, Luffy croaked out, staring in horror at the tiger, listen to me. The tiger lunged forward, and Ace had gotten up with the pipe tight in his hand. Zoro and Sanji blinked. Was he? But suddenly behind them, they heard another roar and looked up to see a giant bear there with a jagged scar over its eye. The tiger was after the bear. Brook yelled out. Now Luffy's in between them. Chopper screamed out in panic. It's all right, Zoro said, watching them. They don't seem to have noticed him yet. Which was true, Luffy was so small compared to the two giant animals that it's quite possible that they just hadn't seen him yet. Finally gaining control of his limbs, Luffy was able to get back to his feet and made a run for it as the two giant animals fought each other. Luffy went running through the forest, ended up tripping and laid there gasping for breath. It's hard to see him freak out and run for it, Nami whispered. Well, he's not as strong as he is now, Robin reminded her with a small smile. Oh, Chopper yelled out in amazement, pointing above Luffy. They looked up in time to see that the rain had stopped and the sun had come out to show a great rainbow above him. I wonder if that means something, Sanji asked as Luffy sat up. The fight between those monsters was already forgotten as he laughed. And it did. The memories they saw next showed him swinging over the crocodile pond, dodging the boulders that Ace knocked down from cliffs, sneaking past the same birds who had once attacked him. His relentless pursuit was doing one thing. It was making him stronger. From what they learned so far, it had been more than 3 months since he had come to live with the bandits, but still he kept going. I don't know if I should be amazed by his tenacity or afraid of his stubbornness, Nami said as they were now watching Luffy leaning heavily on a walking stick as he walked uphill towards them. Gasping for breath, he looked up at them and broke into a huge smile, as if he could suddenly see them, but he said to himself, I'm out of the forest. Dropping the stick he went running the last few yards into the top of the hill. When they looked their eyes widened at what they saw. Through the hazy white mists was junk, not just a hill of it, but a mountain, or rather a mountain range of junk. Wow, what's this place? Luffy asked, saying the question on all their minds. It's full of trash, Nami said, looking around. Where in the world did all this come from? Is this where Ace goes every day? Chopper asked them, staring at everything. Yow, Frankie called out, rubbing his metal hands together with excitement. What a place. Imagine all the stuff I could build here. It's like I died and went to builder heaven. Hey, look over there. Sanji yelled out, pointing through the mists. There's some kind of wall there. A wall, Nami repeated, coming over and straining her eyes to try to see it. As the afternoon sun shone through the fog, it gradually became clear and they could all make out that there was indeed a giant wall standing there. Past all the mountains of junk there were worn-out buildings where people seemed to be living, but there was a giant wall that stood between them and the very tops of colorful roofs. I see how it is, Nami said frowning. That must be where the rich live, and everyone else is cast out here. Robin frowned as well when she looked up at the wall. If that's true, I hate to see what the people are like. Huh, Usopp asked. How come, Robin, you really think that it was these people who built that wall? She asked, pointing to the people that were all shifting through the garbage. I'm willing to bet that the ones inside those walls were the ones who did that. But why? Chopper asked in confusion. For any number of reasons, was all she said. But the one most likely was that they didn't want to look at the poor here. Don't know why, but looking at that thing is ticking me off, Zoro stated grimly as he turned his attention back to Luffy, who was running down the hill. Calling out for Ace, climbing over the junk, tumbling over rocks, and even getting his head stuck in something once in a while. Wish I could visit here, Frankie claimed, striking a pose. Imagine all the super things I could make with all this scrap metal. As they followed him, they ended passing some of the men around here and they couldn't help but feel anxious. Not for them, but for Luffy, for these guys looked far from friendly. But of course, Luffy didn't seem to notice as he kept looking around for Ace, not looking where he was going. Just then an old man carrying a sack over his shoulder and a knife with him almost ended up running Luffy over. Out of my way, kid. He barked at him, but when Luffy didn't move, simply looking up at him in surprise, the man seemed to become irritated and held up the knife. I said move, he threatened, or I'm gonna. He's gonna what? Zoro asked dangerously, his eye flashing. But the man didn't get a chance to finish because over his shoulder someone was shouting, he went that way. Sounds like this guy took something he wasn't supposed to, Brook said as a panicked look came over the old man's face before he ran off as fast as his legs could carry him. Luffy seemed unfazed as he watched the man run away, nearly going back to climbing over the junk, looking for Ace. I don't like seeing Ace like this, Chopper said sadly. He's really mean. I still don't get why he won't give up, Usopp said exasperated. Hasn't he gotten the hint that Ace doesn't want him around? Be patient, Robin said softly. Let's just watch and see what happens. Onward Luffy kept searching for Ace until he came to a patch of giant trees. As he stood up the hill of junk they spotted him. Ace was there, carrying a sack under his arm and clearly running somewhere in mind. Giggling to himself, Luffy jumped down and continued to follow him. He just doesn't give up, Brook said happily. It's kind of encouraging, is it not? To keep going even if it seems hopeless. That or stupid, Sanji corrected. There is a fine line between them. Off they ran after him, wondering what was going to happen next. I wonder what Ace is doing. Usopp gasped as he ran to keep up with Luffy. You really think that this is where he comes? Chopper asked, shifting to walk point and letting the girls ride on his back. Where else would he go? Nami asked, tying her long hair back up to keep it out of her face. We all saw him just a second ago. Luffy wandered through the trees until he reached a small clearing and they looked up to one of the trees to see that there were two boys there. One of them was undoubtedly Ace, the other however, was a boy they didn't recognize. He looked around 10 years old with a missing tooth and short curly blonde hair. He was dressed mostly in blue, but his most noticeable feature was his large black top hat with a pair of blue goggles wrapped around it. Put it away. We can't let anyone else see it, Aces said to him, moving the large sack in his hands. Put what away? Frankie asked. It looks like treasure, Zoro said, shielding his eye as he looked up. Treasure, Nami repeated eagerly. Not that it will do us much good since we can't touch anything, Robin reminded her and Nami's hopeful face fell. Currently, they have at least 200 million in their possession, which is the value of the treasure they got from Thriller Bark. Don't worry, Nami Swan. Sanji said with hearts back for eyes. You are my greatest treasure. Shut up, Nami yelled at him. Usopp put his goggles back on and looked up. Yeah, there's treasure up there, and it looks like a lot of it. From what he could see, a part of the tree branch they were sitting on was cut up as some kind of trapdoor. Luffy went running towards the tree when he spotted them and they heard the boy with the top hat ask, I wonder how much we need for a pirate ship. Don't know, Ace replied, 10 million or 100 million maybe. Long way to go. Another kid who wants to be pirate. Usopp asked in surprise. Who is he? A pirate ship, Luffy exclaimed excitedly from the bottom of the tree. Luffy you idiot, Nami called, though he couldn't hear her. I don't think that this is going to end well, Sanji said, looking back up at the boys who had jumped and slammed the trapdoor shut as they looked down. You guys, Luffy called loudly, are you guys gonna become pirates? I wanna become one too. While Luffy just stood there grinning like an idiot, Ace and the boy exchanged terrified looks and quickly scrambled down the tree like insects before they ran to him and knocked him to the ground. Be quiet, they yelled at the same time. Harsh, Brook laughed. Well, if they did steal that money, which I'm sure they did, then they wouldn't want anyone else to know where they hid it, Nami said, remembering how hard she worked to make sure that no one other than her sister knew where she had hid the treasure she stole back from her days as a thief. Ace, I didn't know you went this far every day, Luffy said, and the Straw Hats looked up to see that Luffy was tied to the tree. But this didn't seem to bother him as he tried to talk to both boys again. Shut up, Ace said, an annoyed frown on his face. So he can speak, Robin said thoughtfully. That's the first time I heard it. But how did he and Ace? Usopp began but Robin merely shook her head fondly, knowing that Luffy was just one of those people. He was just so accepting that little by little, without even realizing what he was doing, he could heal scars in a person's heart. So this is the Luffy you were telling me about, the new kid said to Ace. Luffy looked up to Ace and asked happily, oh, you told him about me. I told him how annoying you are, Ace told him coldly. Man, he's mean, Usopp whispered. He also told me you're empty-headed, the boy added. Luffy just laughed. Oh yeah, doesn't he realize what they just said? Zoro asked, raising an eyebrow. He never does, Nami said with an affectionate smile. You don't even realize that we're dissing you, do you? The boy asked him. Yo-ho-ho, Luffy-san doesn't get bothered much, Brook said. He finally followed me all the way here, Ace said grumpily. I didn't take any of the walkable routes either. Are you a friend of Ace's? Luffy asked the new kid, be my friend too. That sounds familiar, Zoro admitted, and he knew they were all thinking back to when he wanted them to join his crew. Though, thinking about it now, when the captain said, join my crew, it's not a request, more like your first order. That's how it had been since he, himself, joined up, and he had a feeling that's how it will always be. He thought of Jinbei and smiled. Looks like the fishman didn't have a choice in the matter. Shut up, the boy said at once, I'm not going to be your friend. Then what's your name? Luffy asked. That's what I want to know, Frankie said, as he watched. Saw, the boy began before he realized what he was doing and yelled out, I'm not telling you. Yeah, he has that effect on you, Nami sighed. He asks a question and you can't help but answer. This is why I told you to live with me, the kid said, turning back to Ace. The daily round-trip training on the mountain road turned out to be bad. What should we do? They both were quiet as they thought it over. He found our secret, Ace said slowly. He'll tell somebody if nothing is done. His expression turned as cold as ice and he said, we gotta kill him. What? All the Straw Hats yelled in shock. How can they be so serious about that? Shouted Usopp, saying that with such a straight face. Ace is going to kill someone. Chopper yelled, freaking out. Please tell me that the new guy talks him out of it, Sanji began. Alright, the kid said, let's do it. Luffy's smile was wiped from his face and he screamed out, what? The two boys were startled by this as Luffy called out loudly, don't kill me. Help me, I don't wanna die. Shut up, you idiot. The boy said, shoving Luffy's head back in an attempt to make him stop screaming, but it didn't work. Well, you can't blame him for that, Robin pointed out. What did they think they're doing? Nami cried out. They can't really mean that, do they? Ah, Brook called out, his bony hands on his skull face. Luffy-san is dead. He's not dead, you idiots. Zoro yelled at him. Sabo, kill him already. Ace yelled, pointing at him to do the job. What? The kid, now called Sabo, cried out, you do it. I've never killed anyone before. Ace yelled. Well, He sure tried, Zoro added, thinking of the bridge, falling rocks and trees, and leaving Luffy to get eaten by wild animals. Me neither. Sabo yelled back as Luffy continued to scream as they argued, and I don't know how. Don't throw me in the water. Luffy cried out. Luffy, you idiot. Usopp yelled, you don't tell people that. What is he thinking? Zoro asked, smacking his forehead. Okay. Ace called at once, let's head to the river. Why did he tell us that? Sabo yelled. He's an idiot. Ace told him. That I can't disagree with, Usopp sighed. Help me. Luffy screamed. Shut up. They both yelled and he did for a brief second. But then he continued yelling, I don't wanna die. Murder sure isn't as easy as it sounds, Zoro said, nodding knowingly. Yeah, how many people have you killed? Usopp asked him. What did you say? He asked him darkly, and Usopp cowered where he was. No, don't kill me, he pleaded to the swordsman. But still, Brook said angrily. Killing a child, how is that going to fix anything? Oh, I don't think that they ever would have killed him, Robin said confidently. No matter how cold Ace is, I don't believe that he would have been able to do that. Haven't you been watching? Usopp said to her, pointing a finger to Ace. It sure looked like it to me. No matter how cold he is, he's still a child, Robin said firmly. And I don't think that he would kill him. The fact that they're freaking out here proves that. Zoro didn't say anything, but his arms remained crossed and his eye was narrowed as he looked to Sabo and Ace, wondering. Just then they heard another voice call out through the trees, I hear a voice from the forest. Ace and Sabo froze, glancing over their shoulders as another said, it sounds like a kid's voice. Oh no, Sabo whispered as Luffy finally shut up. Someone's coming, set him free for now. Ace said at once, and a smile came back to Luffy's face. We gotta move from here before they find our treasure. They watched as the boys untied him and threw him into some nearby bushes as they waited. What's going on? Nami asked. Looks like they have company, Zoro stated, watching as the voices came closer and closer. Probably the bad kind too, Frankie said. He already knew that it couldn't have been a good thing from their reactions. A group of men came into their sights. Everybody knows those brats around here. Ace and Sabo. Are you sure it was Ace who took the money? Said a large, bulky man with long lilac hair, a thick neck, and muscular arms. He carried a sword in one hand and the frown on his face as he looked down to three average-sized men with him, two of which looked beaten up. Yes, we're sorry, the one with a bandage arm and a sling. We shouldn't have let our guard down. How outrageous he is, the large man said sourly. He can't just steal our money. If Captain Bluejam hears about this, he's going to kill all of us. Are they pirates? Chopper asked. They sure don't look like schoolgirls playing house, Sanji told him sarcastically. And it sounds like Ace stole some money from them. Oh, Usopp said, hitting his palm with his fist in understanding as he remembered seeing Ace carrying that heavy sack with him. So that's what he was carrying with him when he went running into the forest. And now they came to look for it, Frankie said knowingly. Damn it, Ace whispered from where the three boys were crouched behind the bushes, a grimace on his face. I didn't know those thugs were working for Bluejam. You mean that money you stole was from them? Sabo hissed to him. I shouldn't have taken that money, Ace said seriously, and Sabo rolled his eyes in frustration. I can kinda understand how Sabo must feel, Nami sighed exasperatedly. He has a real sword, Sabo muttered, pointing at it. That's Porchami who works under Bluejam. He's crazy. You know that right? They say he scalps his opponents after they lose a fight with him. While they're still alive. Okay, Usopp gulped as Ace and Sabo both ducked down, definitely a guy to stay away from. Let's just let them pass for now, Ace whispered. The Straw Hats watched as they came closer and closer, not realizing what had happened until they heard Sabo say, huh? Where'd he? Blinking, Sanji groaned out, you've got to be kidding me. He didn't. The next thing they heard was Luffy screaming. Let me go. What do you want from me? Let me go. You idiot Luffy. Nami yelled when she saw him in the pirate's hands. This isn't good, Chopper yelled out, now looking scared. You heard what Sabo said about them. Trust Luffy to get himself to get caught by a bunch of thugs like them, Zoro muttered, a hand on his head as he watched. How could he get caught by hiding anyway? Frankie yelled out. He's dead, Usopp called in a loud voice. Who's this little shit? Porchami asked, holding Luffy up by the front of his shirt. Help me, Luffy yelled, flailing uselessly. Ace. Nami smacked her forehead again, her head now starting to hurt from all the times she had done it. What is he thinking? Doesn't he realize that they're looking for Ace? He could have just written his own death sentence, Sanji whispered, holding his cigarette out. What? Chopper yelled, freaking out, you mean they're going to kill him? Well, seeing how we just saw Luffy this morning, I'm guessing that he survives, Zoro said, but he was frowning heavily in worry. Yeah, but I'm willing to bet that Luffy just got himself into a shitload of trouble, Frankie said. Interest flashed across Porchami's face and he pulled him up a little closer as he asked, did you just call for Ace? Just say no, Luffy. Usopp called. So what? Luffy asked, not at all intimidated by the glare. He's got a death wish, Usopp whispered, lowering his head in defeat. Do you know Ace? Porchami asked. I'm his friend, Luffy said at once before he blinked and added, oh, but he did just try to kill me. Yeah, call me crazy, but the last time I checked, your friends don't try to kill you on a daily basis, Sanji said to himself. Can't he keep his mouth shut for once in his life? Nami whispered. That fool. They heard Ace whisper from in the bushes. What a big mouth. I agree with you there, Sanji nodded sagely. I don't know if you know about this, Porchimi went on to Luffy, but your friend stole some money from us today. You don't know where it is, do you? Luffy's face went blank. They all glanced at each other, knowing that he knew exactly where that money was, and it was all right above their heads. All he had to do was tell them and they'll let him go. So what do you say? Porchimi asked him coldly. Just then, Luffy looked away, puckering his lips and whistling. I don't know, he said. Luffy, if you're going to lie, at least let someone who does it for a living do it. Zoro said, clapping a hand on Usopp's shoulder. Hey, Usopp said, smacking his hand away. Yo ho ho, Brook said. Luffy sans honest. Too honest is more like it. Nami snapped. He can't lie to save his life. He needs to get out of there, Robin said, watching them. Who knows what they're going to do to him if they take him. Alright, Porchimi said with a rather evil grin on his face. If you don't know then it can't be helped. Oh, Chopper called out happily. So they're letting him go. Of course they won't. Usopp shouted at him. He has information that they want. Do you honestly think that they'll let him go? Porchimi then chuckled as his face became overshadowed in a sadistic way. Don't worry. We'll help you remember. What are you doing? Luffy cried as the pirates took him away. Where are you taking me? Let me go. They're not really going to hurt him, are they? Asked Chopper, looking up at Zoro as Luffy continued to shout the whole time. I mean, they wouldn't. They won't kill him, Robin said without any emotion on her face. They need him to talk first. And to do that, you mean torture, Sanji finished. But he's just a kid. They can't, exclaimed Usopp, sweat pouring down his face. They wouldn't really, you don't think? If he knows the answer to what they want they'll do anything to get him to talk, Nami said, suddenly feeling a strong surge of hatred going through her body as she thought it over. It's pirates like them I hate the most, the ones who are monsters. Not all pirate crews are like ours, Robin added. In fact, we're more of the odd ones out, Sanji agreed. That's not the issue here, Zoro said as he followed after them. Let's go. Frankie yelled and they went running after the pirates with Luffy yelling the whole way. They watched as Luffy was taken to a shack somewhere in the mounds of trash and bound tightly to an old pillar that was holding the roof up. The whole time, Luffy was fighting, calling out to them all defiantly, let me go. I'm not gonna tell you anything. Porchimi left for a few moments and came back with an enormous wooden hammer that was about twice Luffy's size. Oh, it's just a big hammer, Nami sighed in relief as they watched him drag the heavy object over to Luffy and raised it over his head. He's going to be in for a surprise, Brook laughed. That won't leave a scratch on Luffy's hand. But Zoro, Sanji, and Robin weren't as relieved as the others were. Sure, this may not work on Luffy, but they'll soon realize that and resort to other measures when they discover that he was immune to blunt objects. You little shit, Porchimi said before he brought the hammer down on Luffy's head and caused a slight dust storm from the impact. When the dust cleared, the Straw Hats saw that Luffy was pinned under the hammer. But they all knew what was about to happen and then he bounced right back up so that the hammer flew off, did a flip in the air, and landed with a crash. I told you that my body turned to rubber after I ate the devil's fruit, he told them all, glaring at them. The other men in the shack began freaking out and backing away from Luffy as if he was carrying around a dangerous disease. The only one who didn't look surprised was Porchimi. I guess that ability can come in handy sometimes, Sanji admitted. Not often, but sometimes. The devil fruit, Porchimi repeated softly before he sneered. Looks like you had the real one. He turned back to his men and demanded, give me a pair of gloves. Why yes. One of them shouted and went running out of the shack. Gloves, Chopper repeated in confusion. Weren't they watching? Usopp laughed. If a hammer wouldn't work, what makes him think that gloves will? Unless they aren't normal gloves, Zoro said softly, suddenly having a bad feeling about all this as they watched Luffy being tied to a long rope before he was hung from the rafters. The man came back with a pair of gloves in his hands and Nami gasped at what she saw. They were gloves all right, but they were covered in horrible, long spikes. Porchimi started to walk towards Luffy, shoving his hands into the spiked gloves as he went. Oh dear, Brook said softly, gripping his cane tightly. They won't really hit a little kid with those. Usopp called out frantically. I wouldn't bet on it, Zoro said, his hand resting on his swords again. Damn it, Sanji hissed, now breathing hard on the cigarette to calm his nerves, it wasn't helping. Listen up, brat, Porchimi said, holding up his fist, that money your friend Ace stole is very important to our pirate crew. He reached out and grabbed Luffy's head and brought him closer to his face to intimidate him. And you know where it is. So I need you to tell us. Just lie, Luffy, Chopper called desperately. He can't even if he tried, Frankie said, grinding his teeth together at what was sure to happen. No, Luffy yelled determinedly. Porchemy didn't say a word as he let Luffy's head go. He swung back, still tied to the rope. Realizing what was about to happen, Robin said, "We might want to look away." But none of them did as they watched Luffy swing back and Porchemy punched him across the face with enough force that his blood was splattered on the ground and leaving a long gash in his face. Nami's eyes went wide and her hands fly to her mouth as she stared in horror at what she just saw. Frankie turned his guns onto the pirate's head, only to remember that it wouldn't do any good, but he couldn't stop himself as he growled angrily. Chopper and Usopp were both crying, hugging their bodies just in pain from watching it, as the cigarette in Sanji's mouth fell to the ground as his hands curled into such tight fists that he was shaking. Robin didn't say anything, she didn't move from where she stood, but her eyes had become overshadowed as she watched the blood drip down from the spikes. Brook's jaw was open, but it was impossible to tell what expression he had at the moment. However, he was shaking like Sanji as he took hold of his cane, the bones making a cracking around the handle. Zoro was the only other one who hadn't moved from where he was as he watched it. But his one eye was narrowed dangerously as he glared at Porchemy, his fingers twitching slightly as if trying to reach for the swords at his waist. Luffy was trembling as he started to cry, silently, but cry nonetheless as he swung pathetically back and forth. He was biting his lip, biting back the screams. "You don't want to make a pirate mad," Porchemy exclaimed. "Our captain, Blue Jam, is brutal. He's not the only one." Usopp called as Chopper went forward, desperate to try and treat the injuries and crying out miserably when he passed right through Luffy, remembering that he couldn't do anything. Luffy just hung there shaking, from fear or pain, it was hard to tell. They could see he was fighting back tears as he felt the blood running down from underneath his black hair. "Yeah, it hurts. I'm scared," he screamed, crying hysterically as Porchemy raised his fist again. "Help me. No, don't." Chopper and Usopp yelled out, but he struck him again, and this time Luffy fell silent at once as he swung from side to side like a pendulum. The Straw Hats only stared in horror at what was happening. "You guys go look for Ace and Sabo," Porchemy commanded at his men. "We don't have time to stand around." "Why yes, sir." They gasped and sprinted from the shack as if afraid they would be next if they stayed. And they couldn't blame them as Porchemy delivered another punch. And that was how it went on. Porchemy would punch him and Luffy would cry or scream, but he never said anything. It was almost unbearable to watch, and it was even worse to be stuck watching it and not able to do anything. Luffy just dangled there, continuing to be hit and tortured. Nami finally covered her eyes and she started to cry, unable to watch anymore. Chopper had to cover his ears as well as his eyes, unable to bear the sounds of the punches and the splatter of blood. Tears were falling down his face as Usopp stood there, shaking from head to foot, looking like he was about to lose his mind from watching it. Frankie was looking angrier and angrier with each minute passed, and it was clear that he wanted nothing more than to pummel these pirates until every bone in their bodies were broken. "This is torture," Brook yelled out furiously as more blood sprayed the ground from the deep gashes on Luffy's face, stuck watching this without being able to do anything. "Damn it," Sanji yelled, watching another hit. "How long is he going to go? Can't they see he's not going to tell them anything?" Robin and Zoro were both standing there, watching without a word. Each blow, each cry of pain, every tear that was shed, they kept watching. The gloves, that had been black when brought in, had now turned red and were now dripping the ruby liquid onto the ground as Porchemy kept going, determined to make him talk, though it was clear that Luffy wasn't going to say a word. The two of them were the only ones who had remained calm, though with each hit they winced slightly. This was just like Luffy, he shows respect for things that a person is willing to protect, be it treasure or a secret, to the point of even risking his life to protect it as well. "What's going on?" Usopp yelled, staring around desperately. "Where are Ace and that Sabo kid? Are they just going to abandon him? It's their fault he's here in the first place. Spit it out already." Porchemy yelled, panting heavily. "Pete Porchemy-san, it's no use doing it anymore." The man with his arm in a sling begged. He doesn't have the energy to even scream now. That was true. Luffy just hung limply from the ceiling, too weak to even yell. He was covered head to foot in blood and wounds as the steady drip, drip, of blood dripped down and into a pool below him. "I bet he won't say anything, and to be honest I can't stand watching it, it's too cruel." The man went on. "Show some mercy. Listen to him," Usopp called out uselessly. "Just let him go." Porchemy turned, furious, to his subordinate, and with a kick in the face, he was sent flying to the wall. He attacked his own crewmates now. Brook yelled out furiously. "This heartless bastard doesn't deserve to live," Sanji snarled. "Look for Ace and Sabo if you have time to speak for the brat." He shouted at him loudly. He was breathing hard, his eyes darting to the door as if he expected some kind of monster to come in. "Can't you see that we're the ones that are in danger here?" he demanded. "We're already too late to give that money to Captain Bluejam." Turning back to Luffy, he held the spiked glove up to hit him again. "Answer me," Porchemy yelled as he began punching harder than ever before. Over and over he kept hitting him, trying to get him to crack. When he finally stopped from exhaustion, Luffy was breathing hard as he gasped out in a hoarse voice, "I won't say it." "Luffy, just tell him." Nami screamed out, tears in her eyes. "It's just money. It's not worth it. You little shit," Porchemy growled, punching Luffy yet again. "Stop trying to keep a secret like a grown-up." He gasped for breath as he hit him again. "Say it." "I won't," Luffy said stubbornly, shaking his head as the tears fell. "I won't say it. I won't say it." A vein was standing out in Porchemi's head as he let his arms fall to the side. "Fine," he said, his voice surprisingly calm. "Enough." Their eyes widened as they realized what was going to happen. Porchemi was through hitting Luffy, there wasn't any point now. After hours of torture, he was going to put an end to it all. Porchemi pulled off the blood-soaked gloves and walked over to the wall and hefted up his sword. "No," Chopper yelled out frantically, "they can't do that. They're going to kill him." "EHHHHHH. Brook screamed out. "He's really going to die. If you all would stop yelling and use your heads." Sanji shouted at them, "Remember that Luffy's just fine now. So he obviously makes it out of this." But it was hard to tell themselves that as they watched Porchemi drag the heavy sword behind him along the ground, they could hear the sharp blade made that stinging, ringing noise as he stood in front of Luffy. Luffy forced his swollen, beaten, bloody face up to look at him, tears still in his eyes. There was no mercy in Porchemi's face as he raised the sword high and whispered, "Then you die." The Straw Hats all froze as Luffy shut his eyes tightly and Porchemi swung the sword. It was as if watching it in slow motion as the blade came to Luffy's neck. They didn't care if this was a memory or not, they couldn't stand by and watch this. But just as they charged ahead, at that moment the wall behind them exploded apart and they spun around to see the wood breaking and flying apart as two familiar figures had come bursting in through with wild looks in their eyes. "Don't!" Ace and Sabo screamed, metal poles raised and ready for fight. "Ace and Sabo!" Chopper screamed joyfully, tears in his eyes. "They came." Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me. The author is Warm Memories and Brotherly Bonds by RoseDragonWitch. Chapter 6, The Three Sworn Brothers. Ace and Sabo. Chopper screamed joyfully, tears of joy and relief in his eyes. "They came. Well, it's about time," Zoro yelled out. While he was glad that those two finally decided to show up before it was too late, he couldn't help but feel resentment at how long it took. What's it been? A few hours already since that rubber idiot got himself caught by Porchemi. A few seconds longer and it would have been too late. What was the deal anyway? They didn't care about killing him earlier, didn't they? Just what happened to cause them to change their minds? Just then he realized something. He looked around at the others and he could see that each one of them had been ready to attack. Chopper had shifted to his kung fu point, Robin had her arms half raised, while the others each had weapon drawn or, in Sanji's case, had their leg burning softly. Each of them had been ready to take Porchemi out and to protect Luffy, no longer caring that this had all happened years ago. Not that he was one to talk, he quickly put his swords back in their sheaths before turning back to the real action. Ace had jumped forward, knocking out the man closest to him with the metal staff he had before he landed directly in front of Luffy, holding it out threateningly. He glared furiously up at them all, just daring them to take a step closer. "That's him, Porchemi," one of the men yelled, pointing at him. "That's the brat who stole our money," the man with the sling added. "What?" Porchemi demanded, looking down at Ace with a mad glint in his eye. Meanwhile, Luffy was looking up at Ace, tears falling hard and fast as relief broke over his face. Ace," he yelled, as if he couldn't believe that they had come to help. But Ace didn't seem to be interested in wasting any more time. He jumped up, taking a swing at Porchemi's head, but he didn't get a chance as the bastard's hand shot forward and caught Ace around the throat. Zoro frowned. While he could see that Ace was already a decent fighter, he clearly didn't think before he attacked. He just charged in like an angry bull. That was no way to win. Fighting hard to free himself, Ace struggled as Porchemi started to laugh. "Showing up on your own makes things much easier," he said with an evil grin. "I didn't know what to do, your pal was so tight-lipped." "Ace," Luffy cried out, terrified that something was going to happen to him. Let me go," Ace choked out, still fighting to get freed before he cried out, "Sabo." That was when the second boy charged behind Porchemi and hit him with his own metal pipe so that he would drop Ace. "That's right," Nami screamed out, punching the air ecstatically as Porchemi fell to the ground, a bloody wound on the side of his face. "Take him out, Sabo." "Ace, Sabo," Luffy said worriedly. Sabo stood his ground, but it was clear from the look on his face that he was scared out of his mind. Ace got back up to his feet, looking ready to another round. "That hurt pretty bad, you know," Porchemi said, slowly turning to face Sabo. "I hope so," Sanji whispered. "Yeah, you more than deserved it." Usopp cheered on. "Ace, Sabo, beat him up. You know what happens when you mess with grown-ups, don't you?" Porchemi demanded, raising his sword high. "Your opponent is right here," Ace yelled as he slammed the pipe down on the ground. He then called to Sabo while jerking his head at Luffy, "Sabo, help him." "Ace," Luffy croaked out as Sabo nodded and warned, "The guy has a sword. Be careful." "I agree," Zoro said folding his arms, "even if they aren't half bad fighters, and this guy is nothing but trash, but they're still just kids." Ace charges Porchemi again, dodging around the sword like an acrobat while trying to hit back. While he was fighting, Sabo went for the other men, dodging around them all and knocking a knife out of one of their hands. Quick as a flash, he cut Luffy free and grabbed him, already heading to the hole in the wall. "Let's get out of here, Ace," he yelled back. "Yeah," Usopp and Brook called happily. "Now all they have to do is run. You go on ahead," Ace called, not turning away from Porchemy. "What?" Brook and the weakling trio screamed out at him. "Now is not the time to be playing the hero," Sanji said angrily. "They got Luffy, they should just leave while they're ahead." Apparently, Sabo thought so too. "You idiot," he screamed at Ace, "come on. Once I face an enemy, I never run." Ace just shouted out to him, gripping the pipe tighter than ever, readying himself for an attack. "Is he trying to get himself killed?" Usopp cried out. "What, you brat," Porchemy yelled. "Don't," Sabo yelled desperately, still holding onto Luffy like he was a rag doll. "He's on a completely different level than the delinquents from town. They need to get Luffy treated anyway," Chopper said, looking at how lifeless Luffy was acting. "Don't you get it?" Porchemy sneered. "Playtime is over now. You stole our money. You will obediently return it to us, you insolent brat. I'm sure you realize you've done a bad thing." He pointed his sword at Ace's face and said, "I won't hurt you if you give the money back." "Why do I seriously doubt that?" Nami yelled out skeptically. He had no problems killing a 7-year-old just a minute ago. Ace just used his pipe staff to smack the sword aside as he yelled, "We're gonna make much better use of it." "What did you say?" "Enough of the bullshit," Porchemy cried, losing all facade and his face was contorted with anger. "You, just wait here a minute," Sabo said to Luffy before dropping him to the ground like a sack of flour so that he could fight with Ace. "Why those heartless?" Usopp began as Luffy struggled to raise his head up to watch. "You think they would be a little more gentle," Robin said with a sigh. "If those injuries get any worse, he could die." "Robin, don't say things like that," Usopp yelled at her. "You're being too reckless." Sabo hissed to Ace, "Why are you always doing this?" "I never back down," Ace said seriously. "Apparently it's not the first time he's done this then," Sanji said with a frown. "You gotta admire that," Zoro said, impressed. "Not if it's gonna get you killed." Nami yelled at him. "If he doesn't get out then he could die. But at the same time, they'll just chase after them even if they do run," Robin pointed out. "So what are you saying?" Usopp yelled, freaking out. "The only choice they have is to fight then run. Something that you're good at," Zoro pointed out. "Would you stop it?" Usopp yelled. "Don't be ridiculous," Porchemy yelled, raising his sword up and striking it down. Ace jumped up to try and knock it out of his hands, but instead he slashed through the pipe staff right in half and left a deep cut on Ace's forehead. "If only this wasn't a memory," Sanji yelled. "I want nothing more than to kick that bastard's brains in." "You aren't the only one," Frankie said, his robot fingers twitching at the thought using one of his beams on this jerk. "I too want a piece of him," Brooks said, his sword drawn as he imagined fighting Porchemy in the children's place. "If I lose to a pair of kids, I'll quit being a pirate," Porchemy declared, raising his sword again. "Then we'll make you quit," Ace and Sabo yelled as they rushed forward together. "I'm gonna slaughter you," Porchemy screamed out with an insane flash in his eyes, and that's when the fight really broke out. Zoro said as they watched. "They may be brats, but they're not half bad." "Yow, go for it," Frankie cheered on with a grin. Luffy just sat where he was and watched in awe. Even though the two boys were getting beaten up, they were still able to fight him, until they were finally able to bring him down. Bleeding and hurt, Sabo grabbed Luffy like a doll and then he led the way out of the shack, with Ace right behind them. "Thank goodness," Nami sighed in relief, so glad that nightmare was over. "But why did those two come back in the first place?" Sanji asked as everything grew dark around them as the memory faded. "Despite what we saw earlier, they're not unfeeling," Robin smiled. "If I had to guess, I'd say that when the two of them realized that no one had come back for the money, they might have guessed that Luffy hadn't said anything. And if that's what happened, then I'm also guessing that they realized that if they didn't go and get him, then he'd be killed. But they didn't seem to mind that idea when they tied him tied to that tree saying that they were going to kill him," Frankie pointed out. "Kids say things all the time," she said happily. "Sure, they said they wanted to kill him, but I am also certain that they never would have actually gone through with it. The fact that they showed up at all is proof. But that Luffy," Usopp said, shaking his head in awe at what he had seen. Refusing to say anything even after all that. He was willing to die to protect Ace and Sabo, after all they put him through too. All he had to do was tell those thugs where the money was and that would have been the end of it. "That's just how Luffy is," Zoro said simply. "I see now that's how he's always been." "But why?" Nami asked in confusion. "Why do all this for someone who doesn't even like him?" "I think we're going to find out," Brooke said as the memory returned. It was dark out and the three boys were hidden among some trees. All of them were heavily bandaged with Luffy wailing loudly, tears cascading down his face once again while the other two boys completely ignored him. But at the moment, they were just relieved to see that his injuries were taken care of. Ace was sitting cross-legged up on a small hill as he tried to fix his broken metal staff while Sabo leaned up against the rocks right next to him. "That's a real bad habit you've got, Ace," Sabo said with a frown as Ace weighed the staff in his hands. "Refusing to run even when you're up against real pirates. Why are you so eager to die?" It doesn't feel right, Ace muttered, as if he hadn't heard a word that Sabo was saying. It was better before. Sabo just sighed as he shook his head. I gotta give this kid the credit he deserves. I mean, dealing with both Ace and Luffy. Sanji asked, shaking his head. Yeah, I think I agree with you. We all have the scars to prove we've sailed with Luffy. My hat goes off to this kid if he dealt with them both. After this, Blue Jam's crew will never forgive us, Sabo continued thoughtfully, they'll be after us from now on. That was so scary. Luffy sobbed, still crying loudly. I thought I was gonna die. Ace jumped down from his perch and seemed to lose his temper again. You're so annoying. Shut up. He screamed at Luffy, how long are you going to cry for anyway? I hate weaklings and crybabies. You really piss me off. What the hell is with him? Nami asked, a deep frown on her face. Sure, Luffy can get on your nerves a lot, but this is getting out of hand. Ace-san is very harsh, Brook said, tilted his head and Chopper hid behind Zoro again. Luffy was tortured for hours and he's now yelling like it's his fault, Frankie said sourly before adding, well, it is his fault for getting caught in the first place but still. Not helping Frankie. Usopp yelled at him. I think that we're about to get some answers here, Robin said softly, approaching the three children a little closer, knowing that Ace would never let this go without getting some answers. At Ace's words, Luffy shut up at once. Well, that was quick, Sanji said in surprise as the other two boys looked startled. Normally it took a lot more to get Luffy to be quiet. Sniffling a little, Luffy bowed his head and muttered, thank you. The other two were looking at each other, as if not understanding why they were being thanked. Luffy went on, tears now starting up again, for saving me. For some reason, Ace seemed to grow angry again. Why you? He began, as if expecting a fight, but Sabo stopped him. Oi, he said, trying to calm him down, he's just thanking us. I just don't get how these two could be the same brothers we saw together in Alabasta, Nami said, folding her arms, now completely lost to how these two kids became the two brothers they saw together. We're talking about years apart, Nami, Robin answered softly. But why is he so angry? Chopper asked, nervously looking at Ace's angry face. I don't like seeing him like this. He's scaring me. It just seems like he really hates Luffy, Usopp added with a confused frown. Oh, I don't think that it has anything to do with Luffy, Robin said knowingly. Huh? They asked, looking at her, completely lost. Ace-san doesn't know how to respond to someone in a positive way, Brook said sadly. I think that's it in a nutshell, Robin agreed, remembering all her years of pain of being alone, she could understand Ace's feeling quite well. I don't think that he's had too many people who care about him. He must be carrying around a lot of anger inside, so much so that he just can't contain it, that's why he loses his temper over the tiniest little things. That's why he lashes out at everything, because that's what he's used to. But what made him change so much? Chopper asked. She smiled, and it wasn't a forced one either, a true smile. Isn't that obvious? She asked him, her eyes going back to Luffy. I don't get it. Ace's voice shouted out, interrupting them and they looked up. Why didn't you tell them? Those guys kill women and children without a second thought. Luffy sniffled, trembling slightly at Ace's loud voice. If I'd told them, I could never be your friend. So that's why, Brook said softly, understanding washing through his body. That'd better than dying isn't it? Ace demanded him. Why do you want to become my friend anyway? Because, Luffy started off, but seemed unable to tell him the reason. Because, after all the stuff that I put you through. Ace pressed on, wanting an answer, why did you still follow me this far? That's what I want to know, Usopp said crossly. If it had been me, I'd given up after that first day. Well, good thing that you and Luffy are different, Zoro said. Hey, Usopp yelled. Because, Luffy said softly, he stopped for a moment as if afraid to say what was on his mind. But then he looked up and finally yelled out, because there isn't anybody else. I thought that was the case, Robin said softly, understanding Luffy's desperate desire to follow after Ace day after day. Having seen that familiar look of pain and loneliness in this Luffy's eyes as he went chasing after Ace no matter what the danger was. Ace blinked, unsure to what to say to that, but Luffy went on to explain, I can't go back to Fushia village, and I hate mountain bandits. If I didn't chase after you, I'd be all alone. And being alone is worse than being hurt. No one said a word to that, all of them fully understanding now. For they all knew that feeling all too well, that painful feeling of being alone. Before they joined the Straw Hat crew, and for those 2 long years of training on their own, they all felt that same loneliness that made the days seem so long. But when they joined up, it was as if that pain in them disappeared, they travel around from place to place and the days just seemed to fly by in a happy blur, a life that they wouldn't trade anything for. That explains it all, Brook said softly, solemnly, I think we all understand now why Luffy-san never gave up. Ace was everything Luffy had, Robin summed up for them all. Without him, he was all alone. Yes, he treated him terribly, but for Luffy, being alone hurt more than any of those wounds. Aw, Luffy, Nami whispered feeling tears in her eyes at that as Frankie burst out crying. That's gotta be the sweetest thing I've ever heard damn it. He yelled to the sky as the tears gushed down his face as Chopper held next to him. Already, the bonds of brotherhood are taking root, Usopp declared as he covered his eyes with his arm as he sobbed. The first step has been taken. Would you all shut up? Nami screamed at them, but she was unable to stop her own eyes burning as she watched them. Ace looked lost for words as he thought over what Luffy was saying. What about your parents? He asked slowly. Just Granddad, nobody else, was Luffy's simple answer. And you can't blame him for not wanting to be around him, Usopp said, his tears drying up as he remembered what Garp considered training. That is a good question though, Nami said softly, rubbing her eyes dry. What about Luffy's mother? His father, well, I could understand why Luffy never knew about him, but his mother. At this point, Zoro said with a shrug, I think it's safe to assume that she's dead. But even if she's not, that's none of our business. Ace just looked at Luffy long and hard. It isn't so bad when I'm here? He asked, his tone no longer as cold or as harsh it had been up until now. Right, Luffy nodded. And it'd be bad if wasn't here. Ace continued, his voice still surprisingly gentle, as if he was afraid of what Luffy might answer. Right, Luffy said again. Zoro looked over at Ace and watched how the boy's hand tightened on his staff. He then asked something that made them all stare at him. You want me to live? He asked quietly, his eyes were no longer filled with anger, it was curiosity. Luffy looked surprised by the question and said, of course I do. Zoro watched Ace in understanding. Two unlucky kids who didn't belong anywhere crossed paths. Is this a joke played by fate, or an unavoidable destiny? Frankie continued to cry loudly, now bawling at the conviction in Luffy's voice, such a touching scene. Would you shut up? Zoro and Sanji yelled at him. Ace's face was shadowed so they couldn't see what was going through his head at the moment. I see, was all he said as he turned around, so that the other two couldn't see him. But still, he added as he scratched his head. I hate spoiled kids like you. At those words, all the sadness in Luffy vanished at once as he jumped down and yelled angrily, I'm not spoiled. I'm strong. Strong. Ace shouted, turning back to him, his expression skeptical, how are you strong? You're supposed to be a man but you keep crying all the time. Well, he might not be so strong now, Robin said smiling, seeing already that Ace's heart of ice was melting. But he sure is in the future. Have you ever been punched with a spiked glove? Luffy demanded. I'm only 7, I won't cry when I get to be 10-year-old like you. I'll be much stronger. I didn't cry when I was 7 either. Ace yelled, pressing his forehead up against Luffy's as they continued to argue. You idiot. Don't compare yourself to me. I'm gonna be stronger than anyone else. I promised Shanks that I'd become a great pirate. A pirate? You. Ace sneered. Ah, brotherly love, Brook laughed as the boys continued to glare and argue. It's nice to see it, yo-ho-ho-ho. It doesn't look much like love to me, Chopper said watching them with an apprehensive look on his face. You clearly don't understand brothers, Frankie said with a smile. This is common among them. Well, they might not be the perfect example of brothers, but I don't think we need to worry about Ace trying to kill Luffy anymore, Sanji said in relief. Really? Chopper asked hopefully. I think that it's safe to say that, Nami admitted with a smile, her hands on her hips as she watched the two now in a glare off. Alright, that's enough, Sabo said calmly, stepping between them and pushing the two apart. Oh, by the way, I've got a problem here. The anger melted right off of Luffy's face as he asked, a problem? What now? Usopp asked, not understanding what the problem was. Sabo nodded. Because of what happened today, Blue Jam's crew will be trying to find and kill all three of us, right? Ace blinked. Well, yeah, I guess. Sabo walked past him as he continued to talk. I've been living in this forest, but it's close to their base, in Pirate's Cove. What do you think would happen if I fell asleep somewhere and they attacked me? He'd be a dead man, Zoro answered at once. He'd be toast, Frankie stated. Burnt to a crisp, Sanji added. You'd die, Ace said bluntly. Luffy nodded. You'd definitely die. Yep, Usopp agreed. No doubt about it. Alright, we get it, Nami yelled, rolling her eyes. Honestly, men. Right, Sabo said, looking back at them. So I've gotta ask you something. As the three boys pulled together in a huddle and began to talk. What are they saying? Chopper asked, trying to get closer so that he could listen in. I think it's obvious, Sanji said, having pulled out another cigarette and lighting it. Sabo needs a place to stay until everything cools down, so where do you think they're going to go? You mean back to Dayton's place? Usopp asked in surprise. Good place to hide, with mountain bandits, Nami added, and sure enough, the boys all turned and were heading back in the direction to where the bandits' hut was. Everything faded away, meaning that the memory was over. Does this mean Ace and Luffy really are friends now? Chopper asked them all as they were sent back to the darkness. Well, I wouldn't say they're best friends, Sanji admitted. But at least they've come to an understanding, and I doubt that we have to worry about Ace knocking Luffy off any more bridges. But what about that Sabo kid? Nami asked them, asking the question that was all on their minds. Yeah, who is this guy? Chopper asked, puzzled. I don't think that Luffy's ever mentioned him before. First time that I've heard of him, Usopp agreed, before looking to Zoro. You've been with Luffy the longest out of all of us. You know who he is. I haven't been on his crew that much longer than you have, he told him irritably. What's the big deal? It's not like he has to tell us about everyone from his past. I'm sure that there are plenty of people we know that we never told each other about. His thoughts strayed a little to Kuina at that. Well, sure, Usopp said hesitantly. But aren't you curious? It doesn't matter if I'm curious or not. The fact is that it's none of our business, Zoro said firmly. So we don't know everything about each other's pasts. What does it matter? We really shouldn't be knowing about any of this to begin with. We should stop watching this and get out before we see something that we shouldn't. But before anyone could come up with any ideas, the images came back. Ace, Luffy, and Sabo were sprawled out on the bandit's floor in a tangle of blankets. Dayton was standing there, gaping at what she was seeing. I can see that this is her new nightmare, Nami sighed, looking at the horrified look on Dayton's face. She was having trouble with just two, but now there's a third one. Yo-ho-ho-ho. They're multiplying. Brook called out happily. What the hell is going on? Ace, Luffy, who is that? She yelled out loud enough to wake the whole island. Why is there another of you brats here? Well, they sure know how to start things off, Nami drawled. Luffy groaned sleepily, sitting up and briefly looking up at Dayton through sleepy eyes. Who's who? He asked hazily before he fell back to the floor and started to drift back off to sleep. Ace forced himself to sit up next as he looked up to see who it was. You're so noisy in the morning, he grumbled, and asked them before he fell back to the floor like Luffy had done, don't you know what time it is? Sabo sat up almost immediately after that, but he just looked ahead of him for a few seconds before he fell back with a groan. Yeah, I don't think this is the way you want to start off an introduction, Nami sighed. Robin just smiled. After what happened last night, of course they just want to sleep in. Why's there suddenly a third kid here? Dayton yelled at them, glaring at Sabo. Who are you? The crew watched in amusement as the three boys finally opened their eyes again. Who me? Sabo asked stood up, rubbing his red eyes. When he was a little more awake, he put on a huge grin while Ace and Luffy stood back to watch. I'm Sabo, he said brightly, now fully awake, hi. You're Dayton, right? Sabo, she repeated slowly. I know I've heard that name before. Really? He asked cheerfully. Well, that makes it easier for me then. He took her hand and shook it merrily. Let's try to get along starting today. Well, he gets to the point, Brooke laughed. She pulled her hand away and barked, get along. Don't think that you'll be staying here. Instead of answering, he nearly farted and Sanji smacked himself in the face. Looks like I found out where Luffy learned such bad manners. That's disgusting, Nami yelled in revulsion. Don't answer with a fart. Dayton screamed as Sabo laughed. You've gotta be kidding me. She went on. If you're the Sabo I've heard about, then you're supposed to be one hell of a brat. Sabo grinned and asked, really? And I heard you're an old hag. Really? Sanji asked deadpanned as Frankie howled with laughter. That's really not how you win someone over. They are staying with her, Nami agreed. She may not be the nicest person, but you think that they would try to be more polite. You shouldn't say things like that. Dayton yelled as the other bandits fell over with what Sabo had just said. I don't want to deal with any more unruly kids. Sabo just kept grinning. But you're a nice old hag who can't turn down any requests from other people too, right? I heard that you're an old hag who's like a man among men. Did he really just say that? Nami asked, her head falling forward a little. I can't help but feel sorry for her. You can't really blame them, Zoro said, looking at Dayton with a suspicious glance. It's hard to tell that she's a woman. I'm a woman, Dayton shouted, staring down at the blonde. Can't you tell? I couldn't tell, Chopper stated. After a long moment, Dayton let out a defeated sigh before she turned away and called them by name before snapping, since you're all under my care you'd better hurry up and get to work. Robin laughed, looks like she's not as bad as she makes herself out to be. It's not like she could just kick three boys out when they didn't have anywhere else to go, Nami said. Well, they don't know that they went and made this Blue Jam character mad yet, Zoro added. So I wonder just how they'll take the news. The three boys grinned at each other happily. Thanks, Dayton, Sabo said gratefully before they all turned and went running out the door. Then, we're off. Usopp and Nami both fell face forward at that. Just like that, Nami yelled as the rest of the crew all laughed. Did you honestly expect anything else? Frankie asked beaming. Who wants to stick around cleaning all day when you can go out and explore? Hey, Dayton yelled, Luffy you're supposed to do the laundry and clean the house. No way, Luffy cried, turning around to stick his tongue at Dayton, before realizing that he was being left behind. Ah, Ace, Sabo, wait for me. I think that it's a good thing that he's leaving, Sanji said knowingly, painfully remembering just how poorly Luffy can do chores, anyway. Yeah, if he did try, he'll only end up making a bigger mess than before he started, Robin giggled. Oh, right, Sabo said, stopping so suddenly that Luffy ran into him and fell back onto the ground. But Sabo didn't pay any attention as he turned to look back at the bandits. I forgot to say, he then yelled out loudly, hey Dayton. While we're out, Blue Jam's crew might come around. So be careful, Blue Jam might be coming. Dagra repeated in a stunned voice. Why? We got mixed up with one of their crew and beat him up. Sabo yelled. See ya later. What a way to tell them. Zoro laughed at the horror-struck looks on the bandits' faces as the three boys went running off. Dayton sure is an understanding old hag, Sabo said to Ace when they went chasing after them. But she's still an old hag, Ace told him firmly. Well, they're rude, Nami sighed as they all ran to try and keep up with them. She's letting them stay with her even though a crew of pirates is after them. Little boys are all the same, Robin pointed out smiling. So what now? Sabo asked. Luffy answered that by running up with them and shouting out, food. Of course he would say that, Sanji stated, shaking his head. Ace looked away in annoyance as Sabo laughed. Alright, let's get some food. Soon that memory faded out and by the time they were back in another memory, they were sitting by a large river. Ace and Sabo were sitting at a campfire with a giant fish's skeleton that was just picked clean. While they ate, Luffy was drooling just a few feet away. Sabo then turned to Luffy and asked, Luffy, so you're a devil fruit user? Yup, Luffy said proudly as he eyed the fish. So that explains why you can't swim, Sabo said as he threw the tail of the giant fish to him. Here, you have some too. Thrilled, Luffy jumped forward and caught it, shouting out his thanks. Well, he seems to be a little nicer than Ace, Chopper said, still looking uneasily at Ace, who had snapped at Sabo, you're too soft, Sabo. It's no big deal, he smiled back. Yep, I like Sabo, Chopper said smiling. He's so nice now. Well, it doesn't take much, consider what Ace was like, Usopp whispered, feeling sweat fall down his face at all the things he'd done. Sabo then got up and went to Luffy asking, so which fruit did you eat? The gum fruit, Luffy answered as he swallowed the tail whole. Gum, Sabo repeated before he looked stunned, you're made of rubber. That was all of our reactions too, Usopp said, remembering the shock of finding out that devil fruit users really do exist. Yeah, that's right, Luffy said wiping his mouth. Ace meanwhile was using a bone of the fish as a toothpick as he said, so you became unable to swim in exchange for being a rubber man. That's stupid. Yeah, it is, isn't it? Sanji agreed. Luffy jumped back up and yelled defensively, it's not stupid. I've got a bunch of unbeatable techniques. That's for sure, Chopper said, thinking of some of them. But Robin was smiling knowingly, knowing that Luffy had a long way to go before he could call them unbeatable. Oh, is that right? Ace asked, leaning back on the ground patting his full stomach. A guy who couldn't even catch a fish shouldn't talk like that. Sabo pulled on Luffy's cheek as Luffy marched over to Ace, as if about to fight him. So you really are made of rubber? He exclaimed in interest, Luffy stretching out over several feet. That's so cool. Don't play with me like that, Luffy said before Sabo let go and he fell forward to the ground with a snap. They're treating him like some kind of toy, Usopp said with a sweat drop. Well, it's not every day that you met a rubber man, Brook answered. When I first found out, it was so surprising. I thought my eyes would fall out, not that I have any eyes. Yo-ho-ho-ho. Still, rubber can stretch, shrink, and expand, Sabo went on. It might be pretty useful in a fight. Weird, but useful, Zoro agreed and soon they were watching and laughing loud and hard as Luffy tried to show off his gum balloon only to end up as a beach ball for the boys. As they played around, the boys accidentally ended up kicking him to the water, and Luffy was eaten by a crocodile. What just happened? Usopp screamed as Brook and Chopper yelled in shock. I bet that's what those two were wondering, Robin said smiling as the two boys screamed and watched the crocodile spit out the straw hat and dive into the water. Wait up you, they yelled, we won't just let you eat him and run. And then they dove in after him before everything grew dark. At least they're acting a little concerned for his safety, Brook said brightly, much better than before. They sure have their work cut out for them though, Sanji sighed, shaking his head. After all, it takes all 8 of us to try and keep Luffy out of trouble, and even then, that's no guarantee that nothing's gonna happen. The next memory was of the 3 boys carrying the dead crocodile, tied with ropes, above their heads. Luffy was behind them, carrying the tail, and looking angry at the other 2 in front of him. Well, you know, Sabo offered slowly. Don't be mad. How can he not? Usopp demanded. If it were me I'd be angry. They threw him to that croc. Of course I'm mad, Luffy yelled, obviously feeling the same way. I was almost eaten. Oh, shut up, Ace called from the front. You can eat as much as you want of this crocodile meat when we have it for dinner. The anger on Luffy's face was immediately replaced with a bright smile. Okay, I forgive you. Nami sighed tenderly. The best way to get to Luffy is through his stomach. Sabo looked back at him and asked, you're just going to forgive us so easily? I want to eat this crocodile already, Luffy answered, his mouth drooling. Sabo looked up at Ace and called, there's something I want to check on. Come with me. Now what do you all think he's going to do? Frankie asked as they watched them leave the crocodile near some giant rocks before they headed back to the same tree where they had kept their treasure stashed in the day before. Had it really just been a day ago? It seemed like it had been so much longer than that. Still, after stuffing leaves and flowers around their heads, the boys looked from behind the same bushes they hid behind before as they looked up to the tree. A group of men were there, searching around it, and a few of them seemed to have found the trapdoor. So, one man yelled up at them irritably, "Did you find it?" "No." They called down, "Nothing. Keep looking." They then heard Sabo whisper to Ace, "It's a good thing that we moved our pirate fund to another place." "Oh, that must have been what they were doing yesterday," Robin said, glancing over at them. "Like that was worth getting a little kid killed," Usopp muttered bitterly to himself, still a little sore that they took so long to get back for Luffy. "Yeah," Ace said softly, "you want to go look at the Grey Terminal." "What's the Grey Terminal?" Chopper repeated in confusion. "I'm guessing that's what that giant junkyard is called," Sanji said, noticing how Sabo's eyes flickered in the direction of the mountains of trash. "Yeah, I guess," Sabo agreed before they looked at Luffy and said, "You should go back to Dayton's place first." "Did they really think that he's going to do that?" Zoro asked, rolling his eye. "No." Luffy yelled so loudly that Ace had to dive top of him, covering his mouth to keep him quiet. Telling him to do that was pointless, Sabo sighed. "What did you expect?" most of the crew asked while Brook and Robin both laughed. They followed the three of them back to the junkyard and watched as they came closer to the wall, silently keeping their eyes open for anyone who might be part of this Blue Jam's crew. The three of them ended up piling up on top of each other like a totem pole behind a large pile of junk so that they could get a better look. Not having any fear of being seen, the Straw Hats walked a little closer so that they could get a better look. The part of the city in those walls was all worn out, dirty and broken down, though at least there were some decent houses that were built there, much better than all the mountains of trash. Looking inside the wall, they could see that there was a crooked sign labeled, Edge Town. "I guess that must be where the residents who have at least a little money must be living," Usopp decided. "I wouldn't call it the best place to live," Sanji said, looking at the suspicious buildings. "It looks like you get drug dealers and criminals spawn from that place. I bet that most people can't even leave their houses without needing some kind of protection against muggers. I rather live in there than with all this trash," Usopp pointed out, jerking his thumb behind them to where some shady-looking men were arguing with each other over what was in some bags. "I rather live there and inside a house than out here with these guys." Just then, some men, who they guessed were part of Blue Jam's crew, were talking to some of the other terminal residents, asking questions to where they last saw three young boys. "What do you think that those guys are doing?" Chopper asked, pointing to the pirates. "Looking for those three," Nami said, pointing to Luffy, Sabo, and Ace. "What else would they be doing?" "This isn't good," Sabo's voice said, and they looked back to see him looking anxious. "The place is swarming with delinquents from town, and Blue Jam's crew. This is serious. We must have really made Blue Jam mad," Ace said below him with Luffy struggling to support them both. "I guess," Frankie said, thinking of what happened at Water 7 to how his boys were beaten up and his house destroyed. He frowned at his crew at those memories, trying to hold back the resentment he felt. "If a couple kids stole from me and beat up my boys, I'd go after them." "Hey guys," a man behind them suddenly shouted, and surprising the boys so that they fell into a heap on the ground, "Somebody here is looking for you." As soon as the trio was spotted, they ran for their lives with Blue Jam's crew right behind them, and they were only able to lose them in the thick forest. Later. "Damn it," Usopp gasped, on his knees and tongue rolling out his mouth, trying to catch his breath after having run after them the whole way. How can they run so fast like that?" "Big baby," Nami said, as she fanned herself with her hand, "you're telling me that you're tired after a little run like that?" You and Robin were riding on Chopper. He yelled back angrily as the three boys were found leaning against a tree, or Luffy's case, hanging upside down by a branch. "Looks like they got the guys from the Grey Terminal helping them," Sabo said in a depressed tone. "Guess it's better to just lay low for a while, at least until things calm down." "That would be the best course of action," Sanji agreed. "The last thing they need is to go out and pick fights when they don't have to." "It doesn't matter," Ace said firmly as he picked up his staff. "If we run into them, we'll just fight." Nami sighed. That sounded like something the monster trio would have said. "Well, sure we could," Sabo said hesitantly, "but there's no point in picking a fight." "I agree with Sabo," Luffy added brightly. "That's a first," Brook laughed, strumming up his guitar, Luffy-san choosing not to fight. "I think he's only agreeing with Sabo because he's nicer," Robin giggled. "You just shut up." Ace snapped at him, and just like that the memory faded away until they were standing in a large clearing. Ace and Luffy stood across from each other with Sabo standing a short distance away watching them. "What are they doing now?" Chopper asked, looking around in puzzlement. "Begin," Sabo called, holding up his hand like how a referee would in a wrestling match. At that, Luffy ran ahead, spinning one of his arms in a circle while Ace stood still, his arms crossed over his chest, as if testing him. "I'm going," Luffy yelled confidently, "Gum, pistol." That was when he shot his fist forward, but the aim was so bad that he ended up hitting the ground, which caused his fist to bounce back up and punch him in the face. That was when the Straw Hats all started laughing. "Oh, the poor guy." Sanji laughed, holding his ribs. "He's so bad, but this is just too good." "That doesn't surprise me," Robin laughed loudly. After all, it took me all these years to be able to fully tap into my own devil fruit powers. You don't master your abilities instantly after all. Yo-ho-ho-ho, that's true, Brook added cheerfully as he watched Luffy spinning around like a top before falling to the ground. It took me over 50 years to be able to use the full effects of the Yomi Yomi fruit. Well, I guess we all have to start somewhere, Frankie pointed out as he roared with laughter. We should just be happy he got better, Sanji added grinning. Ace sighed. I told you, he said, suddenly rushing forward and kicking Luffy in the face, what the hell are you trying to do? Sabo grinned. It's over, he said, turning to write a big 0 on what appeared to be a scoreboard behind them. What are they doing? Chopper asked, now looking at them all, hoping that one of them could explain. I get it, Zoro said, looking at the scoreboard. They're training, fighting each other and improving their skills. Looks like Luffy keep losing, Usopp said, looking at all the zeros. I recall that Luffy did mention that he could never win against Ace, Sanji said thoughtfully, thinking back to their meeting in Alabasta. He didn't seem to be upset by it though, Chopper reminded him. Yeah, never being able to win a single fight against someone is rough, Zoro said, thinking of all 2001 straight losses with Kuina. But it only makes you that more determined to try harder. Suddenly it was Sabo and Ace's turn to fight, this time with Luffy watching. The fight was longer this time around, each boy giving as good as he got, both pretty well matched, but it ended up with Ace winning again. After that, Luffy went against Sabo, only for Luffy to have his ass handed to him. Frankie whistled loudly. That's harsh, he just can't seem to catch a break. Ace rolled his eyes and sighed. I've already told you, he said, your fruit isn't useful for anything. Crap, it won't work. Luffy yelled out in frustration, just a little more, again. No, Ace said, crossing his arms stubbornly, we can only fight 100 times per day. Wait until tomorrow. Don't they have anything better to do with their time than pound each other? Nami demanded exasperatedly. I guess not, Usopp said, as he fell to his knees at the thought of getting beaten hundreds of times over the years. The guys really were monsters. Sabo went back to the scoreboard and counted them all up as Luffy and Ace continued to argue. Final scores, me and Ace were 26-24. His jaw fell open as he cursed and cried out, he beat me 2 more times. I've got to get stronger. And of course, Ace is the strongest one, Usopp sighed tiredly. I got that feeling after we met him, Nami sighed, running her hand through her hair. Luffy sure has a long way to go to beat him, Frankie laughed, but stopped almost at once at the reminder that he couldn't, not anymore. Thankfully, no one seemed to notice his slip of the tongue as Luffy was now yelling, when I'm 10, I'll kick your ass. By then, we'll be 13, Ace reminded him before he picked up his pipe staff and called to Sabo, we better go look for some food. Luffy's angry mood changed at once at the mention of food and was more than happy to follow after them to a river that was filled with the same crocodiles that almost ended up eating Luffy before. They're going hunting for crocodiles? Brook asked. Looks that way, Robin smiled. Hey, Zoro said with a grin. In a place like this, you eat it before it eats you. Looks like we'll be having crocodile for dinner, Ace decided as they observed the crocs, trying to figure out which one to eat. That meat looks good, Luffy said, drool dripping down his face. Man, doesn't he ever think of anything but food? Sanji said. At least you don't have to worry about him wasting anything, right? Usopp offered. Luffy, Sabo said, make sure not to get eaten, alright? Wasn't it their fault that happened? Chopper asked. It's always easier to blame Luffy for when things go wrong, Nami offered. Just watch, Ace said, you'll just get in the way. He hadn't even finished saying that when Luffy jumped down screaming out, crocodile meat. I told you to watch. Ace shouted as he and Sabo jumped after him. Boy, he's a real handful, Frankie laughed. Of course he was, Zoro smirked. Even more back then than he is now, at least we know he can protect himself, we don't have to worry about him getting eaten all the time. Yeah, now it's only half the time, Nami sighed. I hope not, Chopper shivered as he watched the 3 beat of the crocodile and drag it back to shore. The next memory was of them standing near the wall that led to the place called Edge Town. They looked around expectantly, but for some reason they didn't see the boys. Now where are they? Usopp asked, shielding his eyes as he looked around for any sign of them. Dunno, Zoro confessed, also glancing around. Though I thought they decided not to come around here for a while. You honestly expect them to actually go through with it? Nami asked them irritably. Luffy and Ace can't sit still, and that Sabo kid isn't much better. What are they doing? Chopper suddenly asked as a large group of people were walking through the gate in the wall towards the city, each one carrying bags. I don't think it's strange to think that the residents here take what they find from the mountain of trash and then try to sell it, Robin said as a cloaked figure stumbled by, pulling a long cart that was covered with a tarp. Zoro, Sanji, and Robin all looked up at the figure, watching it stumble around as if he was unsteady on his feet. Whoa, what's with that guy? Usopp asked as the man almost fell and had to support himself against cart to keep him from going down. He looks like he had one too many, Frankie commented. Let's follow him, Zoro said at once as Sanji and Robin all began to follow after him. Why? Nami asked in surprise. He's just some drunkard, isn't he? Trust us on this one, Zoro told them as they neared the figure now talking to a guard, asking what it was that they were pulling in the cart. Crocodile leather for sale, the figure said, pulling the cover back to show him. Wait, is that? Nami asked softly, suddenly realizing to who that man was. Looks like it, Robin smiled back. Not bad, they're small enough to pull it off, Usopp said, now grinning. What are you all talking about? Chopper asked, now completely baffled to what they were talking about. You'll see soon, Robin smiled at him gently as they continued to follow the figure through the gate and into the city. Like they all thought, the buildings here were dirty and rundown, but still much better than living at Trash Mountain in the Grey Terminal. Looks like this place is the rough part of town, Frankie said, thinking of Water 7 and how he used to rule the black market. This almost reminded him of home. Hard to believe that people actually live here, Nami said, looking at the passing windows to either see timid or threatening figures looking out. I wouldn't feel safe stepping outside my house if I had to live in a place like this. Better here than the Grey Terminal, Sanji offered once again as he looked around. Didn't you did say that Goa Kingdom was known for being beautiful, Robin-chan? Because it couldn't fool me. Where the nobles live, that's true, Robin answered as a group of thugs came out from the alleyway to the robed figure. But like everywhere else, if you can't afford it then you're worthless. It seems you're carrying something valuable there, one of the muggers said as he walked forward with a smug grin on his face. Answer, you bastard. Shut up if you know what's good for you, came a familiar voice from underneath the hood. Why are we following this guy? Chopper asked them all, not realizing whose voice that was. I thought that we were following Luffy and… Wait for it, Frankie said as the others smirked. What? The thug cried. The pipe staff came from the cloak and tripped the thug up. Thing was, it came from much lower than where the man's arm was supposed to be. Before you rob somebody, you should choose your targets more carefully. That voice said, reaching down and throwing off the cloak to see that it was Sabo, Luffy, and Ace stacked on top of each other again, all of them looking ready to fight. Ah, so it was them, Chopper exclaimed in amazement while the others all smiled at each other, deciding not to say anything. It's those brats, one of the thugs cried. But before anyone could do or say anything more, the trio was on them and soon it was a brawl as the three kids took them all out. Frankie laughed and applauded as he watched Ace sucker punch one of them so that he was out cold before he even hit the ground. I love these guys. What a team. Though they were only kids, and were heavily outnumbered, they were more than a match for these guys as they knocked each one of them out. It was soon over, the three of them escaping with nothing but a few cuts and bruises, and once they found the cloak, they climbed up on top of each other's shoulders again, leaving as if nothing had happened. Should I be concerned that a few kids were able to beat up all those thugs who had guns and knives with them? Nami asked them all, looking a little nervous at what she just saw. You saw the forest, didn't you? Zoro asked as they followed after the boys again, still dragging their crocodile leather behind them. On this island, you have to get stronger or you'll get eaten. Personally, I think that those jungle animals are a bigger threat than any lowlife thug. You guys are heavy, Luffy complained on the bottom of the stack as they stumbled through the streets. It'll be worth it, Ace's voice answered, I'll treat you guys to some ramen soon. Ramen, Luffy's voice asked. How can he not know what ramen is? Sanji sighed, remembering the countless times that Luffy asked for that for dinner. It was his second favorite food, second only to meat. Well, it's not like they have anything but meat back with the bandits, Nami asked with a forced smile. Just be patient and you'll see, Ace answered as they walked uneasily on their feet through Edge Town, and towards another gate that led to a place called Town Center. When they passed through this gate, that was when they all gasped at what they saw. Gorgeous, Nami gasped, her eyes shining at what she was seeing. This whole town around them couldn't have looked more different than Edge Town. There were tall, brightly colored buildings on either side of them that were so clean that they shone like diamonds in the light. There were hundreds of stores on all sides, people dressed in fine clothes doing their shopping and enjoying the nice day. They were also taken aback that almost lost track of the boys and had to run to keep up with them. They traveled through town center for a few blocks before they met with some men and traded the crocodile skin for a decent amount of money before they headed on, deeper into the city. In the center of the city was another wall which held a beautiful palace that rose higher than a mountain and looked down at them all. I'm guessing that's where the nobility live, Robin said, looking up at it with a strange look on her face, as if she swallowed something bitter. This really is Goa Kingdom. A country without any trace of dirt, known as the most beautiful across the East Blue. I thought Luffy was born in Fuchsia Village, Chopper asked, tilting his head in confusion. He was, Robin answered, Fuchsia Village is still part of this kingdom, but I'm guessing that it's so small that they don't notice it. Remember, I guess that it's on the other side of the island. She remembered the direction that Garp came from when he first brought Luffy to live with the bandits, and the opposite direction that Ace went running off to in every day. They followed after the trio of boys, all of them staring around at all the fancy stores and expensive merchandise. Does anyone else notice something about these people? Zoro asked as the people were giving the boys the same exact critical looks. The fact that they're all ugly. Usopp pointed out, which was true. The faces here were indeed all very ugly, with constant sour or stuck-up looks, as if they smelled something disgusting. Well, yeah, Zoro added, but I was talking about the fact that they're avoiding them like he's carrying a plate or something. Yo ho ho, you're right, Brooke said as they watched the people around them moving back as if afraid of getting their clothes dirty. I think that it's the clothes that they're wearing that's doing it, Robin sighed, having seen this very often. How in high society, how you dress and how much money you have means everything. The clothes aren't bad though, Chopper pointed out, just a little dirty. I think that's the problem, Sanji said, watching them, some of the women actually taking out handkerchiefs and using them to cover their mouths. I normally like a clean surface, but this is ridiculous. It's almost too clean. It's like there's not a speck of dirt anywhere. I mean look, Usopp said, looking around at the streets, and tapping his foot on them as if to prove a point, the streets here's so clean you can eat off it. Yes, and where do you all think that trash must go? Robin asked them, her head turning back to the wall that they walked out from. They all looked at each other. You mean the gray terminal? Nami asked, suddenly realizing what she was saying. Yes, Robin nodded. I get it now, they throw out what they don't need or want and it all piles up in the gray terminal. I don't know if I like this place, Chopper said, not liking the snotty looks the nobles were given the cloaked figure. These people, they're not, I mean they're, but he trailed off, not sure what he was trying to say. But Brooke seemed to understand. I agree with you, Chopper-san, Brooke said, knowing full well the look that they were giving them. That look as if they knew they were better than anyone else. These people reminded him of someone but he couldn't think of who it was. They paid us a good price for that crocodile leather, Sabos came out from the cloak as they continued on, more money for our pirate savings. I'm hungry, Luffy whined again. Just hold on, Ace answered, soon you'll be enjoying some delicious ramen. What is ramen? Sabo asked, is it really that good? I don't care, Luffy whined, just hurry up. After walking a little ways, they had followed them to one of the fanciest looking restaurants any of them had ever seen. It was huge, a good 5 stories at least, and they could tell Ace was smiling when he said, this is the restaurant. Not bad, Sanji said, looking at it. Wouldn't mind running a business that looks as good as that. If only the customers were better than the kind around here. The host inside bowed and welcomed them in, but when he looked up and caught sight of who had just entered, he paled and became somewhat frantic as he tried to get them to leave. Wait a minute, he stuttered out, you can't come into my restaurant. Why can't they go in? Chopper asked in surprise, they didn't do anything. Does it look like they have money? Frankie asked him. I thought that it would have been obvious from the looks they got outside, Robin observed. But this city values rank and status above anything else. Unless they have money, they aren't welcome just anywhere. And in a place like this, then anyone who looks like they're broke, even if they're starving, isn't welcomed. Sanji's eyes narrowed dangerously. What a crap reason to refuse someone food. It's people like them that he couldn't stand, snotty, big shots who thought that they were better than anyone else. These cooks are all disgraces to chiefs everywhere. As far as he was concerned, anyone who was hungry was a customer, any chief worth his salt would feel the same way. But before he could begin to rant and rave about this, there was some shifting around under the cloak and Sabo's hand pulled out a round, golden pendant that bore the crest of a daisy. I'd like a private room, Sabo said, his voice much deeper than normal. The host gasped for a moment, eyes wide as he stared at it. That's. He stuttered before he gave him many low bows and said in an oily voice. It is an honor that a noble would visit my restaurant. We'll serve you right away. He thought that they were a noble because of that pendant. Zoro asked suspiciously. I'm guessing that emblem is something that only the nobles wear, Robin said, leaning down closer to the crest so that she could get a better look at it before Sabo put it away. Hey, that was great, they heard Ace whisper as they followed the man, where'd you get it? It was something I found in the city, Sabo answered unusually apprehensive. In other words, he stole it, Usopp answered with a shrug. Robin didn't say anything to that, she knew it was the most likely reason, but still, she couldn't help but notice the nervousness in Sabo's voice. If he really just stole it, why would he be so worried instead of bragging about it? Still, she said nothing as she watched the boys being led to a private room somewhere up on the upper levels. The room alone was big enough to hold at least 24 people and was beautiful, carpeted with statues and crystal decoration on the walls, with a sparkling chandelier was over their heads as the boys awkwardly sat down at the table. Wow, Chopper called, looking at everything with wide eyes. I'll say this much, Sanji said, breathing out some smoke. They pay be rotten people, but these guys don't spare any expense on decor. As soon as the host left them, Luffy whined about wanting to come out, but Ace told them both to stay put until after they brought the food. A few minutes later, a waitress came in with the 3 bowls of ramen. Don't they realize that something's wrong? Sanji asked as he watched the girl put the bowls down in front of them. I mean, even if he's hungry, 3 bowls of ramen for just one person. I'm guessing that even though these nobles are rich, they don't have too much common sense, Zoro commented with a smirk. They probably have others do all the thinking for them, Frankie laughed. They're too busy counting their money to do anything else. Here you are, sir, 3 orders of ramen, the waitress said politely, quickly backing away from them as if she was afraid she would be scolded for staying too long. Sorry for the wait. Please, enjoy, and then she bowed her way out of the room. That was when the other 2 poked their heads out from the cloak. So, this is ramen. Sabo exclaimed hungrily. It looks delicious. Luffy cried, drooling. Ace smiled as he threw off the hood. Come on, eat it, he told them, and they had no problems doing what they were told. And soon they were eating it like they hadn't had food for days. Again, these guys need to work on their manners, Sanji said, shaking his head in disgust. Sabo was grinning, a satisfied look on his face. You're right, it's delicious. Brook laughed. Ah, it does look good, I wish I could have some. Too bad it's just a memory, Robin agreed, now starting to feel a little hungry herself. I'll be sure to make some when we get out of this place, Sanji promised, and Brook, Chopper, Frankie, and Usopp all cheered happily before doing a dance around him, chanting, ramen. Ramen. Soon enough, the boys finished the bowls and Luffy was shouting out, I want more, but before he could finish, the other 2 clapped their hands over his mouth to keep him quiet before Sabo cleared his throat and called in that deep voice for 3 more bowls. There won't be anything left in the kitchen by the time they're done, Nami said, shaking her head. Well, growing boys need food, Robin pointed out. It's the restaurant's fault for not realizing what's going on anyway, Zoro said as the boys hid under the cloak again and the waitress came back with another helping. One person ordering all that ramen. Like I said, they have no brains. And they watched them eat more and more, they just kept bringing in the food, which was like adding fuel to the fire. The boys were clearly showing this place no mercy. How many bowls is it now? Chopper asked in amazement as they inhaled bowl after bowl. I think 23 of them give or take, Usopp said, doing a quick count of the empty bowls. Come on, you mean to tell me that the kitchen still hasn't they figured out that something's not right? The boys ducked back under the cloak, not even done with this next helping when the waitress came back in, gasping for breath, looking as if she had run up here from the kitchen. Not even bothering to hide his abilities, Luffy's arm shot out and took the tray from here. She stood there frozen for a second before she screamed and the door shut behind her. Well, if they don't notice something's wrong now, then they are all hopeless, Zoro said as the others laughed. And that was true. Soon, the door opened, and there stood someone who could only be the owner. Sir, can you please explain? But his voice trailed off when he saw the boys there and he yelled out in shock. Crap, they found out. Ace exclaimed with a startled look on his face as he swallowed the last of his food and grabbed his staff. Run, Sabo yelled, and then the 3 of them made a break for the nearest exit, which happened to be the window, and went crashing right through it. Wait, what floor are we on? Nami screamed out. Doesn't matter, Sanji laughed as he and Zoro jumped after them. Let's go, yo-ho-ho-ho. Brook laughed, also taking a jump, and almost flying through the air as Frankie picked up the girls, one in each hand, before he also followed, with Chopper and Usopp right behind him. Chopper had turned to his guard point form and had stopped his fall easily while Usopp landed on top of him and bounced down to the ground. The thieves are escaping, the owner shouted from the window, someone get them. What a rush. Frankie laughed as he went chasing after the boys. What fun this is. This explains why Luffy loves to dine and dash, Usopp said, also laughing as they caught up with the boys. It's them. Those brats again, a voice yelled as they ran. Again with those 3 criminals. An officer yelled. Why did they let them into the restaurant? Don't run. Someone catch those brats. I guess that this isn't the first time that they did something like this. Robin asked, now laughing outright. Ah, these snobs deserve it, Zoro grinned. But as they ran, they ended up passing by a finely dressed man with a thin mustache and a top hat, much like Sabo's but with feathers, a flower, and what appears to be a chain-like band on the hat. When the boys ran past, he stopped dead as he spotted Sabo. Sabo, he cried in shock, is that you, Sabo? Wait, so you were alive? Sabo stopped dead and turned to stare back at the man with a panicked look on his face. They know each other? Brook asked in surprise. Probably some guy he ripped off in the past, Usopp came up with. Come back home, the man yelled. Come home, Nami asked, her eyes widening a little. What's he talking about? Doesn't Sabo live in the Grey Terminal? Why would he have any connections here? Zoro was now looking at this Sabo kid with new interest. Just who was this kid? Luffy and Ace were probably wondering the same thing, and Ace asked, looking back at the man in mild surprise, Hey, Sabo, that man's calling you. Who is he? Luffy asked, also stopping. Sabo didn't answer that as he said hurriedly, he must be mistaking me for someone else. Let's go. And without giving them a chance to ask any more questions, he went running off. Ace and Luffy exchanged a surprised look before going after him. Hey, Sabo. They both called after him just as the man shouted out for him to stop one more time. What's going on here? Usopp asked, not understanding what just happened as the memory faded away into darkness. Just who is that Sabo kid? What's his story? If we knew that, don't you think we would have told you? Sanji asked irritably. Just then, the next memory appeared, and they were standing on a grassy cliff that was outside the forest and had the perfect view of the ocean. The three boys were there, Sabo leaning up against a tree with the other two standing in front of him, apparently wanting some answers. Luffy was patting his stomach happily as he said, "Since I ate all that delicious ramen, I'm in a good mood. But a little sleepy." "Don't go to sleep now," Ace snapped at him before glancing at Sabo, his arms folded. "Before we do anything else, I think that you need to tell us just what it is you're hiding from us." Luffy, who was starting to drift off to sleep, was suddenly wide awake. Sabo's hiding something. What's wrong? I don't see what the problem is. I'm not hiding anything, Sabo exclaimed even as he shifted nervously and couldn't seem to bring himself to look at either of them. Luffy blinked up at him innocently. "Really? Luffy, you really need to learn how to tell if someone's lying to you," Nami sighed. "He trusts people too easily. That's why he has the rest of us here," Usopp said, punching his own chest proudly. "And you know more about lying than any of us," Zoro said. "Hey," Usopp yelled, smacking his shoulder again. "It's obvious that you're hiding something." Ace yelled out angrily. "Spit it out, Sabo. Do you think it's okay to keep secrets between us?" Both boys were standing in front of him, and said together, "Spit it out, Sabo." Sabo's blinked and stepped back, still refusing to look at either of them as he said, "I already told you, I'm not hiding anything." "You think that he could come up with something more believable than that?" Nami sighed. "I mean, it's obvious that he's hiding something." Luffy and Ace both grabbed Sabo by his collar and shook him. "Talk, damn it, or I'll make you talk." Ace yelled and Sabo put his head back as he gasped for air. Let me go," Sabo choked out as he shoved their hands away. All right, I'll tell you." Ace and Luffy backed off and Sabo leaned back against the tree behind him. He looked between his friends for a moment before turning his gaze to the ground. That was when they all heard the truth. Luffy exclaimed in surprise, "A noble's son. You took the words out of my mouth, Luffy," Nami said, her jaw wide open in shock. "He's the son of some rich nobles." "Lucky? Who?" Ace and Luffy asked in confusion. "Me of course," Sabo yelled. "So he didn't steal the crest," Brook said as Frankie, Usopp and Chopper were staring at Sabo in amazement. "It must really belong to him. But why would he be living in the garbage?" Nami asked, not understanding what was going on here at all. "I think we'll find out," Zoro said. But he was personally thinking that if Sabo had to live with people like the ones they saw in town, then he had a feeling that Sabo chose to leave all that behind. "But that makes no sense." Usopp cried out, pointing at him, "Look at him. He looks like he's been living in that garbage for years." "Shut up and listen and we might find out," Sanji said, watching how Sabo flinched violently at the word noble, as if reminding him of a bad memory. Ace and Luffy blinked and started picking their noses before saying in unison, "So? You're the ones who were asking." Sabo yelled, annoyed. "They may not be related, but they sure act like it," Nami whispered to herself. Could anyone blame them for thinking that these two were really blood brothers? Sabo sighed, sliding down the tree until he was sitting on the ground. "The truth is," he said softly, "my parents are still alive. I'm not an orphan of the Grey Terminal, and the man we saw today, he's my father." Ace's eyes went wide but Luffy didn't seem to react at all. Sabo glanced up at them. "I'm sorry for lying to you," he said sincerely. Luffy crossed his arms and smiled a little at him. "Well, you apologized, so I forgive you." "Of course he would," Usopp said, smiling fondly, remembering that horrible moment when he left the crew and how he'd been welcomed back after he swallowed his pride and apologized. "To be honest, I'm surprised," Ace said as he turned and walked a couple steps away from them. "Why would you do all of this if you're a noble's son?" "That's what I want to know," Nami said with a frown, puffing out her cheeks with a thoughtful expression. "Aren't his parents rich? Why would he rather live in a place like the Grey Terminal?" "Remember the people we saw in town?" Robin asked her. "If I had to live with them, I probably would have left too." "But they're his family, aren't they?" Chopper asked softly. "Let's be quiet and find out," Frankie said, watching Sabo gritting his teeth together. "I had to run away from home." Sabo confessed loudly and the boys looked at him in surprise. "I thought so," Zoro said, feeling new sympathy for the kid. Sabo sat there, with an angry look on his face as he came clean and told them, "They only care about money and social status, not me." Nami blinked at that. "If I don't marry a girl from the royal family," Sabo told them, his eyes narrowed in resentment, "I might as well be crap to them. I had to study every day, just for that. I was always arguing with my parents because of my poor results in school. For that family, I was nothing more than a nuisance. They must be some pretty greedy jerks to do that to their own kid," Sanji said frowning, his hatred for these snobby nobles rising. "To dictate a child's life," Brook said softly. "That is terrible. They should have been encouraging him to live his life, not to make him live how they want just to make them look better." "Good for him for leaving then," Usopp said, folding his arms. Sabo sighed as he stopped shaking from anger and said, "Sorry if I offend you, but even though I had parents, I felt lonely." It was that last sentence that caused it to be too much for the more sensitive members of the crew, and they all started crying again. The poor guy. Frankie cried a river of tears as the others had tears in their eyes. "Would you stop crying every few minutes?" Nami yelled as Zoro, Sanji, and Robin watched the scene sadly. The people of Grey Terminal aren't like the nobles, Sabo said, crossing his arms, but for me, it was better than to live for decades in that place, with the nobles. It's strange how that is, Robin said frowning. How it's those with money and power who care more about keeping it all. Well, you can't miss something you don't have, Sanji commented. Robin gave Nami a sideways glance before finishing. Even with all that money, he wasn't happy. He chose his freedom instead. He could go back at any time, but he'd rather remain where people truly care about him as a person, not as a tool. They must have been bad if Sabo rather live in the junkyard than with his parents, Nami said, thinking of Belmere. They may not have had a lot of money, but she knew without the shadow of a doubt that her mother loved both her and Nojiko. She blinked for a moment before holding her hands folded over her chest, her heart aching as she thought of her mother and sister, suddenly missing them more than ever. If she had to choose, she would rather have grown up poor again if she could be with them. Suddenly, she was starting to see why Sabo must have left. Ace looked at Sabo with new understanding as he muttered, "Now, I understand." But just like magic, the gloomy look on Sabo's face disappeared and he jumped up to his feet with an excited grin on his face. "Ace, Luffy," he said smiling, taking them all by surprise. "We definitely have to set sail and leave this place someday. I want to leave and see the world. Everything that it has to offer. And then write a book about my adventures. I don't mind having to study navigation. I'll get stronger and I'll become a pirate," he called out at last, punching the air with his fists. "What a nice dream," Robin said with a big smile as the others laughed good-naturedly. "I think I like this kid," Zoro said as Ace and Luffy grinned with Sabo. He remembered making a similar vow to himself after he first lost to Kuina. He decided that if he wanted to become strong, he would dedicate his life to swordsmanship, and work until the day came that he would become the greatest. Ace laughed. "I know," he told them as he walked out to the edge of the cliff. He gazed up at the bright blue sky and said determinedly, "You don't need to tell me. I'll be a pirate and I'll fight and fight and fight until I become the most famous. That will be proof that I lived." He held the staff up and declared, "I don't care if the world doesn't accept me, no matter how much they hate me, I'll become a great pirate and stand above everyone else. I won't run from anyone, or lose to anyone. I'll make sure the world knows my name." "Well, his name certainly went down in history," Robin stated softly, and they all glanced at each other nervously, knowing full well that Ace's name will always be remembered, though not in the way that Ace had planned here. But what did he mean by, "if the world doesn't accept him"? Chopper asked slowly. "It's hard to explain," Robin said, her eyes overshadowed by her bangs, and suddenly very tense. "Robin-chan," Sanji asked her, noticing her on-edge frame, "what are you?" "It's nothing," Robin said firmly, forcing another smile on her face. "It's not important now." Thankfully, Luffy was giggling. "I see, right," he said, running forward to stand by Ace. He raised his fists in the air, took a deep breath and shouted out confidently, "I'm going to be king of the pirates." The Straw Hats had heard this line countless times before, but at the same time they couldn't stop the smiles coming to their faces. They each remembered the first time they heard that dream from their captain's mouth, and felt their resolve to fulfill their own dreams increase. Ace and Sabo both stared at him as Luffy burst out laughing. The Straw Hat crew all soon followed suit, unable to stop themselves. "You're talking nonsense again," Ace sighed, scratching his head in annoyance as Sabo burst out laughing too. "You're so funny, Luffy," he cried out. "I can't wait to see what happens in the future with you." "The idiot has that effect on everyone," Zoro stated, looking forward to seeing how their dreams came to an end. For the Straw Hat Pirates, they all will continue to pursue their dreams for eternity if they have to. As long as they exist in this world, they will continue to chase. Sabo suddenly stopped laughing and asked, "Wait, it's okay that we all want to be pirates, but is it okay that we all want to be captain?" "That would be a problem," Nami smiled. Ace blinked in surprise as Luffy looked over at him. "I didn't think about that," Ace stated slowly. "Sabo, I had planned that you'd be my navigator." Luffy grinned and put his hands on his hips. "You'll be on my ship," he cried out predictably. Sabo and Ace turned to Luffy. "I refuse," they both cried out. "Well, I often wonder why I joined him," Sanji stated with a shrug. Maybe Ace and Sabo had the right idea. "Luffy-san is so much fun, yo-ho-ho-ho," Brook laughed, strumming his guitar again. Luffy exclaimed, looking disappointed, "Come on, do it. Join my crew. I'll be fun." "Now that brings me back," they all said, thinking when Luffy said that to them all. They each had refused at one point or another, but Luffy never gave up. They all learned the hard way that Luffy has a bad habit of getting to you in the end. Luffy may be idiot, he may be reckless and high maintenance, often causing them to question their own sanity for joining him in the first place, but still, at the end of the day, they just can't bring themselves to regret joining. "That will never happen," Ace said at once. "Yep, I agree," Sabo nodded and grinned at the outraged look on Luffy's face. "Yeah, I wonder if I should have said that," Sanji said. "Be nice," Robin smiled. "Yeah, I guess," Sanji sighed, puffing on his cigarette for a moment before his eyes turned back into hearts and crying out dramatically, if I hadn't joined, then I never would have been able to sail with you two gorgeous ladies. Oh, my heart aches at the thought of never seeing you two again. That was the most painful thing during our 2-year separation. But now that we are all reunited, I feel as if those painful memories of hell disappeared to the corners of my mind. What mind? Zoro asked. Just then, Sanji's eyes turned to anger as he growled softly, say that again, Moss head. I said, what mind? He repeated, I'll kill you. Sanji yelled, kicking out, which Zoro dodged, going for his swords, before Nami hit them both on the head. Would you two knock it off for once? She yelled at them. Sanji-san, just what do you mean by hell? Brook asked interestedly. As Zoro gave Nami a death glare, Sanji was on his knees, growling to himself, I don't even want to think about it, it's the thing of nightmares. But what do you? Chopper began, but Luffy had interrupted their conversation. What? Luffy paused and then looked away saying, HMPH, like I care. What's was that? Ace asked, his eyebrows raised. He's not so good at hiding his emotions, Nami sighed, a little surprised that Luffy let it go so easily. Normally, he went on until you just couldn't take him anymore and said yes just to get him to shut up. Now it was Sabo who was laughing. You're definitely a funny guy, Luffy. The last thing they saw before the image faded were all three boys laughing their heads off as they gazed longingly out at the sea. But when the next memory came back, they were in the forest again, though if they had to guess, it wasn't far off from where they were, they could still hear the ocean waves. Luffy and Sabo were both waiting around a tree stump, and watched as Ace come towards them, carrying a bottle of sake. What are they doing now? Usopp wondered as Sabo put down 3 red sake glasses, using the stump as a table. Looks like they're gonna have a drink, Zoro sighed, suddenly wishing he could have some of what was in that bottle. Hard to say what's gonna happen later on, Ace said, walking up to them, dropping the bottle next to the glasses. But I think it's best that we decide future things in the future. Maybe we'll end up on 3 different ships. I'm guessing that's what happened, Usopp said, remembering how Luffy once said that Ace had set sail to become a pirate a few years before he did. Did you steal Dayton's liquor? Luffy asked him as Ace grinned and opened it with a popping sound. Did you know? When men drink together, they become brothers, he said, pouring a generous amount of the drink into each cup. They do say that, Sanji said, thinking of when Chief Zeph once mentioned it in passing. Brothers, really? Luffy asked, a wide, beaming grin on his face, Sabo grinning just as widely next to him. We might not be pirates on the same ship, but we'll be united by our bond of brotherhood, Ace said, now smiling so widely that, for that moment, he looked like the man they met in Alabasta. So this way, no matter what we do or where we are, no one will ever break that bond. He exclaimed, picking up a cup. The other 2 copied him, each taking their own glasses. From now on, Ace proclaimed firmly, holding his glass up, we're brothers. The trio clinked their glasses together, Luffy and Sabo affirming Ace's words, and as the sun shone down on the cups, the drink in them seemed to sparkle as they tilted their heads back and drank. It was too much for them. Frankie, Brook, Usopp and Chopper all broke down crying at that. That was the most heart-warming thing I've ever seen. Frankie cried out so loudly that the rest of them had to cover their ears. I love these little guys. He bawled, twisting a tissue in his giant hands. You don't see that kind of bond just anywhere. Usopp cried out dramatically, I can't believe we were able to witness such a thing. I wish I had brothers like that. Chopper bawled out with Frankie. So touching. Brook cried out, tears falling from his empty sockets. I feel as if my heart is being torn in 2, though I have no heart of course. We get it. Nami yelled, her hands over her ears, as they cried. I think we all agree that it was special, but you don't need to carry on like this. So Luffy had 2 brothers, not just one, Robin said softly watching the 3 boys all laughing together again. Ace and Sabo. You think that Sabo's out there on the sea somewhere and we might meet him like we did with Ace? Chopper asked happily. I'd like to meet him. Complete approval. Frankie cried out as he blew his nose loudly, and the darkness came back so that the memory faded away. I'd love to meet this guy. That seems like a pretty good guess if you ask me, Usopp said, drying his eyes and beaming at Chopper. Maybe that's why Luffy never told us about them, to make it a surprise when we do meet them. Really? Chopper called out in excitement. Oh, I can't wait. As they all talked happily with each other about meeting Sabo, they failed to notice that some of the more serious members of the crew weren't sharing their enthusiasm. While they did want to meet this second brother of Luffy's, they couldn't help but feel as if they were missing something important here. After all, some of them had met Ace and seen the brothers together, yet neither one of them ever mentioned another brother. Why was that?